So I'll just advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. And I would just advise anyone in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and all devices are muted. You can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi and the password details are available on the gallery rules, and it is not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. So item 1 on the agenda is apologies, of which we've none. So we can move on to item 2, which is chairperson's business. So there's not a lot for me to cover on that this week, other than to just refer members to item 2.1, which is the record of the informal meeting that we held with Gail Lynn on the 12th of March. And I thought it was a really helpful briefing from them. I thought it was a really good engagement on issues relating to Irish education in English medium schools, but also in terms of modern languages more generally. I thought it was a really good engagement. So I just wanted to check with members. We had said we would try and raise some of the issues that they had highlighted. Our members agreed that we raised the issues that they had highlighted around grading and assessment of modern languages, with a particular emphasis on Irish and English medium schools, but also more broadly, and to ask for details of what policy development is being undertaken to address the concerns they've highlighted in the report review of grading in modern languages from 2019. Are members agreed?
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Okay. Unless there's any other issues arising from that meeting, we can go on to item 3, which is matters arising. Now, last week, conscious we dealt with a lot of business. So to recap, Ray's provided a very in-depth briefing, and I just want to propose that the sort of range of budgetary questions that they suggested in their briefing that be highlighted with the department, are we happy that we send those questions on to the department? Are members agreed?
Agreed.
And then also after our session with Synergy and UB, the committee had agreed to forward the academic research on Irish medium education onto the department for a response, but I would also want to suggest that we supply Synergy's briefing paper as well, and request replies to the specific questions highlighted in that. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. And then the last bit for me on this, unless members have anything else, during our forward work planning discussion this week, there was discussion about a strategic planning session in closed session, and I think the members were to circulate availability with the clerk. Just to maybe speed that process up a bit, I've asked the clerk to circulate some suggested dates for this, and then everyone can indicate availability, or if they're not able to attend or not planning to attend. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, that's everything from me on that item. Were there any other actions arising from last week's session that anybody wants to highlight? No, so we can move on, and I think we can. Is this the school group have arrived today from BRA? No, not yet. That's okay. But everyone in the public gallery, you're very welcome. We also have item 4, which is the draft minutes. So they are at page 10 of your meeting packs. So I just want to seek members' agreement that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings. Is this agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. Do we know if the minister is here yet?
Yes.
Okay. So that takes us on to item 5, which is an oral briefing from the Education Minister. So I would refer members to your packs, and at page 19 there's running through, there's a briefing from the committee clerk at page 19, and then a suite of briefing papers from the department, pages 22 to 73. There are also some responses and correspondence from recent correspondence directly from the Minister at pages 161 and 163. So just draw members' attention to those items. And we can now bring the Minister and the departmental officials through for the briefing.
It's like getting lined up in front of the firing squad here.
Ready for it?
I'll let you get settled.
Good night.
Afternoon, you're very welcome to the Education Committee. couple of you have been before us already in this mandate, and Minister, it's a pleasure to welcome you here today for an oral briefing and for a question and answer session. So really, I think that is just to hand over to the Minister for an initial oral briefing. We would suggest up to 10 minutes for that, and then we'll move into questions from the committee. So over to you.
Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nick, it's a pleasure to be here, and committee members to join with you to, first of all, meet you formally in my role as Minister for Education, and also to meet yourselves in your important roles as committee members of the Education Committee. And let this be the first of our engagements. I'm sure we'll have many more, and of course I'll always make myself available to the Education Committee. I think it's important, having sat on the chair, Mr. Chairman, that you've been in previous committees. I always think it's important that ministers give the proper place that a committee should have, and I'll certainly undertake to do that. So let me just move into some opening remarks, and then of course I'll be happy to take questions. Above all, my top priority is to secure a sustained and meaningful increase to education funding, both resource and capital. Education is very much an investment. It's truly one of the most powerful instruments for reducing poverty and inequality, and it sets the foundation for sustained economic growth. So education must be a key priority across government. Yet this year, the education sector's opening resource budget was £66 million less than in the previous year. The Department had therefore been estimating a funding gap in the region of £300 million throughout 2023-24, and I do, of course, welcome the allocation of a further £296 million as part of the financial package, which will address that gap, and that also includes the issue of teachers' pay. There's been significant progress on the issue of teachers' pay. A formal offer being made to the teaching unions on the 11th of March. And of course, I'm hoping that all teachers and school leaders accept the offer, which provides a fair settlement and will make a real and lasting difference to teachers' lives. However, without additional funding in the 2024-25 year, my department cannot manage the recurring cost of the teaching pay awards and the impact of increased pension contributions. In addition, funding was not provided to meet the costs of the EA pay and grading review for support staff, and as the committee knows, the EA advised the department in February that they had underestimated the staffing figures contained in the business case submitted to the Department of Finance in December. The Education Authority has now revised their figures, and the business case was resubmitted on the 15th of March. My officials are continuing to work with the Department of Finance to seek business case approval, and I've bid for this additional funding as part of the Executive's Budget 2024-25 process. However, I am deeply concerned that next year's budget outcome could leave us in an extremely difficult position, so significant additional funding is urgently required to stabilise the education sector. It's a similar picture in regard to capital investment. Children across Northern Ireland have the right to be educated in schools which are comfortable and safe. They're of good quality and are properly designed and resourced to support their learning. Over the next decade, we need to transform our school buildings so that they are truly fit for the future and can provide the best possible educational experience for our young people. However, that will require a step change in the level of capital investment and in the pace and scale of delivery. The recent loss of Fresh Start funding has been widely discussed in recent weeks. This funding was long promised to develop and support both shared and integrated education and provide much needed new facilities. It needs to be returned to the education sector as a matter of utmost urgency. I've placed the 9 integrated projects and the Brookborough campus into my department's major capital works programme to progress in planning and design. And I've submitted high priority bids for these projects to the Department of Finance as part of the budget process, and I would be asking every party at the Executive to support these bids. I've also submitted proposals to ask the Executive to recommit funding equivalent to that removed from Fresh Start to support the delivery of the Strual campus. The Strual Shared Education Campus, it's a new and pioneering approach to the delivery of education provision in Northern Ireland. It will bring together 6 post-primary schools from the grammar, non-selective and special school sectors on the former Lissanelli Army Barracks site. The schools will share facilities and deliver a shared and enhanced curriculum. The campus is a long-standing executive priority, and it will provide a large-scale model of shared education which will be evaluated to inform the future development of education in Northern Ireland over the coming decades. Struil will produce a wide range of educational, societal and reconciliation benefits, and it's a key element of the Department's promotion and development of shared education. The Struil programme is currently at a critical juncture. After a lengthy procurement process, it is shovel-ready with a potential contractor in place, and the full business case is being finalised. However, without the return of the previously ring-fenced Fresh Start funding, the Struil programme will not proceed. The Struil programme, unlike the other former Fresh Start projects, is not affordable solely from within the Department's conventional capital project budget. On special educational needs, capital investment has an important role to play, and my immediate priority is to increase capacity across the education system to ensure sufficient appropriate places for September 2024. The EA is working at pace to create additional places in special schools and specialist provisions in mainstream schools. The aim is that children with special educational needs will have their school place confirmed at the same time as their peers. Now, this will be challenging this year, and I must reiterate, it will not be achieved without significant additional capital funding for SEN. Not a single additional pound of capital funding has been provided to my department for additional special needs placements. My officials are also working closely with the Education Authority to expedite planning for special educational needs placements for the future. We need to restore trust in the system with children, parents and teachers by creating a more responsive system, ensuring children's special educational needs are identified early and they receive the support they need. SEN transformation must be a key priority. The current system is quite simply no longer sustainable. Over the past 12 months, my department has led an end-to-end review of special educational needs in collaboration with the Education Authority. And this has identified several priority areas which can be progressed at pace and used to inform longer-term systemic change. I've also made the development of the early learning and childcare strategy a top priority for my department, and in recent weeks I've set out my plans to the Assembly and to the Executive. Officials are working at pace to develop a strategy to benefit children, parents and wider society. The dual aims of the strategy are child development and parental employment. We've been looking at approaches elsewhere, but I want a bespoke Northern Ireland model that meets local needs. Any model that we adopt needs to be based on evidence and deliver value for money. It will take time to develop and require a significant long-term commitment for the Executive. Estimates are up to £400 million per annum or more, depending on who is eligible and what level of support that we provide. I'm also considering short-term measures. We need to stabilise the excellent early years programme, including Sure Start, as a foundation on which any expansion can be built. So, subject to executive funding, I would also like to move ahead with the expansion of the preschool education programme so that all children can get 22.5 hours of provision in the year before they start school. There is a clear inequality within the current model which needs to be addressed. I'm also committed to delivering an ambitious programme of transformation and progressive change within our education system, building on our strengths, addressing the challenges and working collectively with a range of partners to ensure every child is happy, it's learning and succeeding. At the heart of this is investing in the educator and investing in the curriculum. There's nothing more fundamental to pupil outcomes and their educational experiences than effective teaching and learning. Teachers need high-quality professional learning opportunities if they are to meet the complex and developing needs of pupils in a rapidly changing world. Similarly, effective and valuable learning must be shaped around a modern, skills-based 21st century curriculum. My department is working with SEA to refresh the curriculum across all key stages and is working with the EA to enhance the professional learning offering, including the development of a TPL framework which should go out to consultation shortly, and we're ready to rapidly deliver more should funding become available. My department is working with the key delivery partners to consider how we can build upon, review and refresh the existing school improvement policy. Whilst many of the principles of every school a good school remain sound, I'm mindful that it's now 15 years old, and we need to take account of the significant changes to our education system and our society that have taken place during that time. As part of this, we will consider how the intent of the policy is realised, including setting out a clear delivery model for implementation, and we must look at ways to improve the support available to schools and practitioners, making best use of the data to assist in self-evaluation and improvement, and remove barriers to learning that some of our most vulnerable children and young people may face. We must also strive to do better for our learners and provide more effective support for our schools and teachers. Finally, Mr Chairman, if I can just touch upon school uniforms. School uniform reform is very important. It's an issue that I intend to progress quickly. We had a lively debate in the Assembly recently on making school uniforms more affordable, and I plan to launch a consultation in the late spring to put guidance on a statutory basis. That consultation will cover areas such as avoiding single suppliers, minimising branded items, enabling parents to access cheaper generic items that are widely available, as well as ensuring that school uniform policies are developed in partnership with parents and pupils. The consultation will also seek views on whether an annual price cap on the total cost of uniforms would be appropriate. And I aim to bring legislation to the Assembly as quickly as possible, and I know that the committee will support me in this work. To conclude, I've set out an ambitious programme of reform that will impact, I believe, meaningfully on the lives of children and young people. Renewal of the school's estate, SEN reform, and a comprehensive early learning and childcare strategy will fundamentally transform our children's educational experience. However, such a transformation requires the Executive to deliver sustained increased investment in education, and I hope that you will support me as I take each of these issues forward. So, Mr Chairman, I'm happy to take any questions that you and the committee have.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for keeping the time. It's not always a given when we have witnesses presenting, so that is appreciated.
Pardon the pun. Not always a given.
Well spotted, well spotted. I also should just properly welcome Lindsay Farrell and Suzanne Kingan from the department. It was my oversight not to do so when you arrived, so apologies on that front. So you are very welcome here today, and we have a lot of questions that we want to get through. So I will kick off from my end. We heard a lot there about the ambition, and we heard a lot about the challenges, and clearly there is a huge pressure on resources. And I think looking at the budget briefing you've sent through in advance of this today, it's hard to argue against that when we're looking at a potential 900 million shortfall. And I know in terms of your contributions in the Chamber already, we have heard a lot about how you feel you need other departments to step up and support delivery of this work, and how you need the resource to be made available to you. But as you're here before the Education Committee today, I would want to really focus what you as Education Minister is going to do really to move us beyond talk of collaboration, talk of pooling resources, and actually making it happen. So I would like to get an idea of what you plan to do to utilise the Children's Services Cooperation Act. Essentially, do you have a plan of how you're going to deliver that sort of work? Do you have a plan to ensure that health and communities and the other departments in the mix actually do work together collaboratively? But it would be keen to understand how you will take the lead on that, because I wouldn't want to be here at the end of the mandate saying, well, we didn't get the support from other departments we needed. So the question to you as Minister is, what are you going to do to make that happen? Essentially, how can we as a committee measure your success in that regard? Well,
there's a number of points, Nick, just in that. We shouldn't need legislation to collaborate across government, but it's there, and therefore it's right that we follow that. The programme for government in times past moved us out of that silo mentality within departments, where we identified what were the key outcomes, and then departments would feed into what that key outcome was trying to achieve. That was forcing then departments to identify what did they need to do collaboratively to achieve that outcome, and that's very much part of the process. So just one example, even on the early years childcare strategy, I've taken a paper to the Executive setting up a task and finish group. I've sought each minister to identify a lead officials within their department. My department will lead that task and finish group, but they are in the process. Some ministers have already identified who that lead official will be, because it cuts into the Department for Communities, the Department for Economy, Finance, the Department for Health. And that is making sure that when it comes to the development of that particular strategy, that there is that collaboration within the proper structure of that task and finish group, and that'll be a key part of me taking that forward. So that's one example where we have collaboration in that area, but there are many examples where in special education we are actively collaborating with the Department of Health. You know, I was at Fleming Fulton, visited the school. There we could see firsthand the teaching that was taking place, but also from the Department of Health, those key health staff that were also meeting the health needs of the children. So there are processes in place, and it's already happening when it comes to collaboration. So Lindsay, I don't know if you want to just pick up a little bit more on that.
And just to add to that, in terms of the Children's Services Cooperation Act, which formed really the basis of our children and young people's strategy, there has been a cross-departmental delivery board set up to oversee the implementation of that important strategy across departments. And I know one of the issues that group will be considering is how we can better draw on the Children's Services Cooperation Act and how we can pinpoint particular areas where more work needs to be done. But as the Minister has said, there's already really effective cross-departmental working, I think particularly around special educational needs, also in respect of the 14 to 19 agenda and the joint working and collaboration that is in place with the Department for the Economy. So there's good work going on. Of course we can build on that, but I think there are mechanisms that are in place to ensure that that's happening at both an operational level between our colleagues in the EA and their operational counterparts across health and other agencies, and then at a policy level between the departments as well. So
just to reassure members, Conor Murphy and I have already had a conversation around that 14 to 19 skills issue. We're going to follow up on that. So ministers do engage across the areas that interface within the various departments. The question that you asked, how do you measure success? Well, success, I suppose, will be measured in many different ways. For me, that measurement of success is based upon that individual child. And where there is one child that is not getting the full potential realised within the education system, then we're not doing the job that I want us to be able to do. There will be children who will reach their full potential, but there'll be other children who aren't. And I don't think any of us here can say that we are delivering for every single child in Northern Ireland. So it'll depend on what your measurement of success will be. Some of that is in the gift of other ministers as well. In order for me to do my job, I will need the support of other ministers and the executive collectively, but I've no doubt you'll hold me to account on whatever measurements you decide to use in terms of how we do our job.
And thank you for that. And look, I understand that there's a will and ambition to collaborate, but I wouldn't say that our previous mandates in Assembly have been characterised by really active, meaningful collaboration. Are we going to move beyond aspirations and into the realm of actively pooling resources, delivering projects together in collaboration with other departments, not just if we can see there's crossover and we'll have a conversation, but will resources be pooled to make things happen? I think there's been a number of debates in the chamber where, and I understand why, your response has been largely, I want to do this, but I don't currently have the money. If those projects, like think of Holiday Hunger, as we discussed yesterday in the chamber, clear crossovers with the Department for Communities, clear crossovers with the Department for Health. I mean, are you actively engaging with those officials to talk about how can we, with other ministerial colleagues, how can we get a pooled resource to deliver these things which impact on those priorities for all those departments?
Well, I would just gently push back on the assertion that previous mandates there hasn't been collaboration. That's not my experience. I served as Minister for Communities, served as First Minister, and I witnessed collaboration at a very high level, not least during the COVID scenario where the executive, in my view, really did collaborate at a huge, high strategic level. We developed significant schemes that were rolled out at pace, and if ever there was evidence of an executive that did collaborate, it was during what were very difficult circumstances. So on specific individual projects, I would just encourage the committee, you will know from a constituency level, where collaboration does take place within schools and the frameworks that they operate in to make sure that different departments are linking in. Robbie's a member of my constituency in Lagan Valley. We have a process for early years intervention. That is a scheme supported by Public Health Agency, with the education principals all involved. It includes the PSNI. We support that in terms of the department's responsibility to do that, and there's collaboration. So could it be better? Of course it could. Do I want to see more of it? Yes, I do. So there is a willingness there, but there is collaboration taking place, and I would like to see more of it, but I don't think it's right to characterise that there hasn't been collaboration.
Yep, certainly wouldn't say there's never been collaboration, but I think you speak to anybody delivering meaningful projects in covering any department's brief, and they will say they find the silo mentalities of departments difficult to break through. I mean, that's a message that I hear regularly, but I don't want to labour the point or take up time from other members. I'll just move on to one other issue, and if we're talking about the need for cross-departmental work and we're talking about the need for collaboration, that there is no area, I think, where that is clearer than in the area of SEN. So I wanted to really just put two questions to you, and you have referenced it in your opening remarks. The first is in terms of the immediate pressures. Just very directly, how will you ensure that we do not have a repeat in September 2024 of the crisis in allocation of places for our SEN children? You have set out in your opening remarks the scale of the challenge, and I just really wanted to get some detail on what is going to be done to ensure that we do not see those sort of crisis responses in September 24, and that we are in a smoother transition for those pupils who need those places. And I think then more broadly, what assurances can you give our SEN children and their families that your department will deliver on the promise of reform of SEN services? Again, essentially it's that question. How can we measure success as a committee for what you achieve in this mandate and that space? It's been clearly set out as a priority. I think we all know the number of reviews and reports and recommendations, and I know your officials, when they've presented, have been clear. There's no space for any more recommendations. We know what we need to do. So how will we, when we reach the end of this mandate, measure success in terms of that longer term work?
Well, you're right to highlight the issue of school placements, and as we approach September and everyone else starts to identify what school they're going to. Last year there were circumstances which was very challenging and difficult, and there has been work within the department to try and address that. There is a key strategic group that meets to do with placements, and that's linking in with the department and the Education Authority to do that. Now, the most recent figure that I had provided to me was that we were still looking at over 1,000 children needing to have a placement identified at this stage of the school year as we approach September. But I know, Lindsay, this is an area that Lindsay leads for us in the department.
Yes, absolutely. And as the Minister said, and as I've made the committee aware, I have been chairing a meeting or a group, that strategic group the Minister's referred to, since November with senior EA colleagues, so that we were looking to September and working back from that to avoid the same situation that we were in last year. Last year presented particularly unique challenges. I think last year was the perfect storm where we have seen a steadily increasing trend of children presenting with special educational needs for a number of years now. It's a trend that isn't inconsistent with other jurisdictions that you will be aware of, but it is one that they are grappling with in terms of getting ahead of the data as well. But I think what we did see last year was that wave, particularly in the early years, of those children coming through in terms of early years and preschool provision, who had been impacted most by being born during the pandemic, and so hadn't been exposed to those same early childhood experiences either in the home or in the broader community that you would have expected to see. And I think that certainly played into the numbers that we saw last year. So in terms of the work that's ongoing, I chair that strategic group on a monthly basis. There's also daily and weekly contact between the teams at an operational and policy level around the SEN placements. I know EA are working very hard around a data dashboard. One of the issues last year was that data was sitting in different places, and we needed to consolidate that to be able to get ahead of the numbers, get underneath them and understand actually what they're telling us. There's also a longer term piece here in terms of planning and modelling for the longer term, but our short-term focus is very much about placing those children for September. Now, when we talk about the need for more than 1,000 places, currently that is equating to what we expect to be more than 90 additional specialist provisions in mainstream. And so EA has written out, along with other partners across the education system, to all schools. We really do need a collective effort around this. The establishment of specialist provisions in mainstream is consistent with our policy, but we do accept there's been challenges in terms of the implementation of that, and so we're keen to give confidence to those schools who would want to be involved in establishing those SPIMs that they'll be receiving the sufficient support to enable them to do that, but most importantly they'll be supported to meet the needs of those children that are placed within their care in terms of the specialist provision. So that's really what EA is engaged with at the minute, intensive engagement with schools around the establishment of those specialist provisions, and also building on the experience of last year in terms of enhancing early years provision and establishing better partnerships and networks with the voluntary and community sector as well.
And are we on course to deliver those places?
Well, we have our next meeting with EA actually on Monday, and we'll receive their latest update. They're still reporting that it's extremely challenging, as the Minister has said, and in no small part because of the funding situation. Urgent additional investment is required to create additional capacity within the system. Unless schools have existing space, those who do want to get involved in setting up specialist provisions will require capital support in creating those spaces, enhancing or expanding or putting in modular accommodation. So we really do require that urgent additional investment.
As Lindsay has outlined some of that process, and I know the committee is aware of the end-to-end review, 200 recommendations, 12 work streams, the long-term 5 to 10 year strategy to deal with the totality of this transformation that's needed. That short-term pressure is acute, and that has had an impact on our capital spend, and Suzanne heads up the capital side of the department, and she can give you just a flavour of the spend in the last year and what we're going to need. The figure that you can, well, I'll let you, in case I put a wrong figure in the public domain as to what we need for the next year.
So just to say, in the current financial year, we spent £48 million in terms of SEN capital. Our projections for next year are about £70 million. That's on top of our annual recurrent budget for capital is about 170 to 190 million. The SEN need is over and above that because we've so much that is contractually committed already that unless we get that additional investment around SEN, as Lindsay highlighted, we will struggle to be able to provide the actual accommodation for the children. Longer term, we know we need to get ahead in terms of capital planning for SEN. We need to put a programme around it. We need to make sure that we're on the front foot, both in terms of new special schools, extending our existing special school provision and the specialist provision in mainstream, to make sure that we're really getting on the front foot and the children with special educational needs are getting that accommodation. But it will require sustained and increased investment in this area at a time when all the needs of the rest of the estate are still there. They're still important. We've huge maintenance backlog across the estate. We've got our major works paused. So this is additional and new need, and it needs to be funded as additional and new need.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think just the question on reform long term is the only bit that we haven't maybe just covered clearly, just in terms of parent of a child with special educational needs watching this committee. What assurances do you give them that you as Minister are going to deliver on that promise?
Well, that touches on what I highlighted around the end-to-end review and all of those work streams. Now that is a piece of work that is a long-term strategic approach towards special educational need provision, and we're looking at that. I'm also engaging with people who've said to me, I think one of our own members here in the committee, the language around supernumerary, even the terminology around special educational need, and language is important, and that's something that I'm considering around the use of language. Other jurisdictions don't use terminology like that, and I think that's something as well that we just need to consider. But changing how we message on this issue, isn't going to address the fundamental problems, and that's where my focus is on. How do we make sure that we're doing the transformation work? And there's really good evidence, there is reviews, and it's about taking that forward is what we need to focus on.
Well, I've taken up enough time. I'm going to hand over to the Deputy Chair at this stage.
Thanks, Chair. I want to ask you, Minister, about educational underachievement, because all the evidence shows that we have the highest rates of educational underachievement on these islands. Some would argue even further afield than that. Now, the children here are no less intelligent or no less able than children in other jurisdictions, yet we have more children leaving school without qualifications, and that has a long-term impact on society, on the economy, on the health service, on the criminal justice system even. So we had the Fair Start report published. I know there are many recommendations in it, but I saw from the budget briefing there's only £5 million set aside for Fair Start. So can you give us an idea of what the status is of that report at the minute and what you intend doing to address this issue of underachievement?
Thank you, Pat. The school that I was visiting just before I came here today was the Girls' Model, which is a school of over 1,000 pupils, largely taking the catchment from the Greater Shankill area, and there's an area which, if you're measuring around social deprivation, educational underachievement, will be very high up, and they are delivering incredible results whenever we looked at the academic output, but also in terms of the kind of individual that they're creating, and the work that they're doing in transforming lives is inspirational. So the issue around educational underachievement, I think, is an important one, and there will be opportunity to do more on tackling educational underachievement. There's some funding that's coming on stream actually through the Shared Island Fund that we have secured to the tune of around £20 million, and we're in the process now of trying to design what will that look like. So there will be monies going in to that area. On the Fair Start, Lindsay?
Yes, pick that up, and thank you, Pat. And in terms of that budget allocation that you've referred to in terms of Fair Start, yes, you're right. Over the last 2 years, we've been able to allocate just over £5 million to implementation of a range of actions against the Fair Start programme. I think we would accept, as you have highlighted, that does fall short of the ambition that was set out by the Fair Start panel, and indeed they had provided a costed implementation plan alongside the publication of the report. But what hadn't come with endorsement of the report was the additional investment to then deliver the scale of the ambition that was set out. We're all well versed on the issues with the education budget and the significant pressures it has been under for such a period of time in terms of that sustained underinvestment. And I think the allocation to the Fair Start is one reflection of that we have had. And so in terms of that 5.1 million, we have tried to tie that very much to key projects within the Fair Start programme that align with the department's priorities in terms of tackling educational disadvantage. So there's been resources allocated within that to the Special Educational Needs Early Years Inclusion Service within the EA. There's also been an element of it allocated to the EA in terms of its Youth-Led Horizons programme. There's been a range of teacher education and 14 to 19 projects, and also we've been able to fund a 2-year pilot supporting special educational needs provision, and that pilot project with voluntary and community sector partners in terms of the Belfast-wide pilot. So of course we would want to do more and would be able to deliver the action plan in its entirety should the additional budget be there to do. In terms of what the Minister's referred to around the additional funding that has been identified through Shared Island, we'd be very keen to be in a place to be able to engage more broadly with that very shortly around the design of the Reducing Educational Disadvantage programme. That was a key pillar of the Fair Start action plan.
And we've heard constantly about the need for more funding, and everybody accepts that there are budgetary pressures, but there has to be a prioritisation of what's needed in society here. And we have the mental health champion in giving evidence to us later on. And I mentioned some of the issues yesterday, Paul, of the programmes that were cut last year, and I've mentioned them to you as well, Lindsay. And that was the low-hanging fruit. And those were the programmes that were designed to help the most vulnerable and the most disadvantaged children in our education system. Now, given that we have the highest levels of educational underachievement, either the system's failing them or there are barriers or obstacles to young people reaching their full potential. Or maybe it's both. But to give another couple of examples, the Engage programme and the Healthy Happy Minds were aimed to help children to catch up in their learning, to help their emotional and well-being, their resilience, and so on and so forth. And I suppose the question to you is, do you have any intentions to reinstate these programmes, or do you have even a more ambitious intention to bring all of those programmes which amount to wraparound support for the children who need it most into the core funding for the education system?
Well, we've touched on this, I suppose, in debates, and there's been a lot of questions members have submitted on Healthy Happy Minds, and there's a report to come to me in terms of the outworkings of that and what were the benefits of it. Bright Start is another one that people have been contacting me about in terms of securing that in the future. The holiday hunger payments is another one. Would I like to be able to fund all of these? Of course I would. Do I want to do more around tackling educational underachievement? Well, they're the young people who need the greatest level of support.
Paul, my point is this. You have to have priorities. Now, obviously those programmes were not a priority for the department last year. When they were cut, the kids who most need those programmes to catch up in their education, to support them in mental health issues, children from dysfunctional families, children who have had adverse childhood experiences, and so on, they're the ones who were cut adrift. It's up to you as minister to prioritise where you're going to spend your money.
Well, not to revisit the history of it, holiday hunger was a ring-fenced budget, right? So it was a standalone funding stream by the executive.
And I don't want to look to the past. I want to look to the future, and I want to know what you're going to do, not what the permanent secretary did last year.
Well, again, the permanent secretary did not have ring-fence protected funding. It was DUP ministers who introduced the holiday hunger. They gave ministerial direction for it to continue. So my party has been very clear in terms of the approach that we've taken on this. But there was ring-fenced funding identified by the executive. That ring-fenced funding was not there when the Secretary of State didn't give the budget to the Department of Education to fund that. If holiday hunger payments are to continue, there is certainly an opportunity to do that. That will require the executive to introduce, again, the protected ring-fenced funding, which was allocated to it. It didn't sit within the Department of Education's baseline whenever it was first introduced. I make the wider point that it was introduced at a time when COVID monies was available to the executive, and the executive had considerable amount of resource at the time, and they identified that DE could do it because we had the systems in place through EA. Now, I made the points yesterday in the House around the wider context of where we should address these things around the anti-poverty strategy, and to make sure that actually the executive can do what it wants to do around tackling holiday hunger and making sure that people in food poverty gets the support and it achieves what it can achieve. During term time, we can make sure that children get a free school meal. We are not able to control that outside of term time to ensure that the financial support actually results in children being fed. That is left ultimately to parents then when it comes to how they decide to spend their money. But that was a ring-fenced funding pot. So I will want to do everything that I possibly can to help people. But you're right, I'll have to prioritise. I have made the case as part of my budgetary process to the Minister for Finance for a significant uplift on the department's baseline, both on recurrent funding but also on capital funding. I will await the decisions of the Finance Minister and then the wider executive, and whatever funding then is made available to me, I'll have to make those difficult decisions. I hope it isn't on areas that you're raising with me, because that's not where I want funding to be reduced from. I want to invest more in that area. but I will only be able to do what I can do within the funding envelope that I receive. Is there any other points that colleagues want to pick up?
I think Robbie was looking to come in, I think, on this particular
just
point.
a comment.
If there's a question, I'm happy to come back to you.
I think this is a compliment. I think this goes back to nearly the Chair's point about the underuse of the Children's Services Cooperation Act. I didn't get a chance to speak in the debate on holiday hunger. I agree with your point, Minister, in regard to it's not just the Department of Education's lookout in the summer periods. However, it is the responsibility of government, I would suggest, to make sure that no child goes without a meal on a day. And I think it goes back to the Chair's point that there has been an underuse of the Children's Services Cooperation Act. I had a question in the previous iteration with the Department of Education and Health and so on to see how many are utilised. I'm just making a point more than anything, Chair, if that's okay, is to suggest that the full utilisation of that legislation that we have would ensure that children's rights are upheld and we don't have a child going hungry. And I do accept that the budgetary pressures that you're under, but I think it makes your point that as an Assembly and as a department we're not utilising the tools that we have.
I think that point is well made and noted. Back to yourself, Deputy Chair. Anything else just to wrap up?
Could I just ask you one question on Irish medium, Paul? Because you'll be aware yourself there's some suspicions around your intentions in regard to Irish medium, given your history. But I'm happy that we'll start on a clean slate here. But the Irish medium sector has a number of needs. They need investment in accommodation. They need a workforce strategy that they haven't had because there's a shortage of particularly specialist teachers. They need language appropriate exams and curriculum material. And I'm just wondering, what can the sector expect from you over your term in office?
The points that you raise are ones that have been raised with me by some schools directly within the Irish medium sector around their ability to have people in the workforce, because that is a challenge in terms of having teachers. One of the measures that the department took whenever they were reducing funding for student placements was to protect the Irish medium. There was no reduction in the number of students going into the Irish medium. There was reduction of students that went into other sectors. So I think that was a demonstration on the part of the department when it comes to the provision of Irish medium around the workforce. And ultimately, whenever proposals come to me around development opportunities, new schools, there is a clear process that has to be followed. And I'll be following that process. So, I think the principal in Dungannon asked of me that I would treat the Irish medium sector fair and equitably, like every other sector, and I'll do that. Of course I will.
Well, could I just come on, and this is my final point, and it's a statement more than a question. You have a statutory duty to encourage and facilitate Irish medium. You have a similar obligation with integrated education and to support it as well. That means that you don't treat all sectors equally, because Irish medium and integrated haven't been treated equally in the past, so they need to be brought up on a level footing with the other sectors. And because you have that statutory duty, you can make decisions that you can't make with other sectors. And, that's an important issue. Thanks.
Just to extend the obligations of statutory duties, it also goes to shared education in terms of promoting and facilitating, and that takes in your controlled and maintained sector. So there are quite a number of statutory duties, as I've become very aware now when it comes to decision making and considering proposals. But Suzanne grapples with these issues in terms of ultimately advice will come to me around funding of capital projects, for example. But this is an area that Suzanne would navigate.
Yeah.
Can I just stop you, because Suzanne, you gave us that briefing last week, I think. So
I was going to just come in to say I think we probably do need to move on to the next question. So thank you for that. David or Cheryl, are you wishing to come in?
Yep. Thanks very much for being here, Minister. Just to expand before I go on to the school estates thing, just to expand upon some of the Senate issues we've been discussing. It's an issue that had been raised with me, and I raised it in committee as well, but just to get an answer from yourself around this, is the mainstreaming of SEN elements of teacher training for all teachers during their training. And that's because the schools certainly that I've talked to have experienced difficulties with the shortage in teachers, especially with substitute teachers, and they just feel that if there was a bank created through all teachers having that experience, one, teachers would feel less intimidated into coming into a SEN environment and not having that training, but also it would make things a lot easier for them to have that covered. Just wondering if what your intentions around that, and if there's any plans to try and incorporate that into teacher training.
Well, David, it's an important point that teachers, principals have raised with me, that the default position for mainstream teachers in schools is they want to be inclusive. And they want to provide the opportunity for children that have additional needs to be accommodated within their school. Unfortunately, at times, whenever they have said, yes, we can accommodate this child with various different additional needs, they then have felt that there isn't the support, or they haven't had the training in order to assist them. And I think it's really important that we make sure that across our mainstream, that those that are going to be providing that educational experience are trained in that. And know this is something, again, if I can defer to Lindsay on.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that teacher workforce piece is one specific aspect of the work stream under the end-to-end review of special educational needs. And through that, we're taking forward engagement with the HEIs in terms of initial teacher education. And that specific point you've raised is one of the issues we're exploring with them. There are differing views, as you might expect, in terms of should you go for a specialised route for teachers of special educational needs, or is it more around building the capacity of all teachers to be teachers of special educational needs, or is it a hybrid where you have that generic training with inbuilt support, but then you also have a specialist route? So those are discussions that we're having with the HEIs, and we have set up that strategic engagement working group with them, but that alongside the need to really look at a coherent programme of continuous teacher professional learning, because we know once our teachers graduated, they're not the finished article and they need that ongoing support, and so we really do need to look at both of those areas.
Thanks very much. No, pleased to hear that it's sort of moving forward. I defer to the experts, I guess, but to me it seems sensible that even if you have a specialised stream, that all teachers should have some element of base level. That means whenever there are a need for even substitute teachers, then they're available at that level. Thanks very much for your answer. Just move on then to, and again, it probably links in with Sam, but it's more around the school estate. And we heard when I said I was raising some of the school estates, my colleague Cheryl here quickly raised Carrick Academy with me. But my intention was to raise more. Minister, you talked in your first statement to the Assembly about some of those maintenance works and so on, and things that you could do more quickly than probably you can do. You can build full schools, and on my first visit to a school, it was Greenwood Assessment Centre, which is obviously a special school. That school has damp coming down the walls, paint peeling off. They're in a very, very old house with narrow staircases, and doing a wonderful job in teaching some of our most vulnerable kids. And I guess it's what where we want to go with that, and what your intentions are around delivering some of those more immediate maintenance of our school estate, so that it's capable. We heard in one of the presentations before. I wasn't here last week, but the week before, that we're allocating kids, as you will know, Minister, to schools that maybe don't have some of the fundamentals around toilets and so on that they need for accessibility needs. What can we do in the shorter term to ensure that if we're allocating kids to schools that are mainstream, or indeed if they're being placed into schools that deal with the most vulnerable kids, that those facilities are fit for purpose and are not another obstacle to their education?
And I outlined this in the first statement to the Assembly around the capital investment that we need, and you've identified the kind of range of the areas that we do invest in. Special education has really been a demand-led one that we need to fulfil in terms of our legal obligations to children, and that has been getting significant resource and will continue to get significant capital spend. Then you've got your major new builds. And there's a pipeline of work, and they're at all various different stages. And I touched upon the action that I took around the integrated Fresh Start monies that was removed, and that I have now mainstreamed that into my capital projects. But then we need to have a curriculum-led capital spend, because too often you'll go into a school and they will say, here's what we need to do on PE and we don't have a suitable hall, or here's what we want to do in outdoor play and you don't have outdoor play. And some of this, in the scale of the capital spend of the department, is relatively small amounts of money. Still could be hundreds, if not some cases millions. But I really want to set about a curriculum-led spend, as well as the ongoing maintenance backlog, which members all know is significant and growing, and we have been responding to those emergency type scenarios. And the picture you painted of that school, I think we could all recount other examples. Glenwood Primary on the Shankill that I went to, and the water, they had 2 big buckets as I walked through the corridor, and the water wasn't just dripping through, it was pouring through, and the dampness you could feel and taste. And yet that's what our children are having to put up with, which is wholly unacceptable. So, we need to get beyond urgent repairs and having a proper planned maintenance programme, as well as a capital programme that covers a whole range of areas.
Does anyone else want to come in on capital before I move on? Cheryl, do you want to? Yeah, may as well stick with the theme. So if you're going with capital,
thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for the update. I suppose it's no surprise that I'll raise some capital issues with you. I think you've been bombarded with emails and questions from myself, and I suppose in terms of the capital estate right across Northern Ireland, but obviously in my constituency, it is dire. It's critical. But if you could give me an update on the school enhancement programme. That is one that obviously has been frozen, I believe, and there doesn't seem to be much progress moving forward. I also have significant concerns around the increase in cost from the Education Authority in terms of repairs and maintenance, and the pressure this is putting on the school budget, which is actually causing schools to end up in a deficit, and obviously how the department is going to deal with that if that is right across the board. Also, the current pay formula, I raised this previously. I have some schools within the constituency, because of basically teachers are retained within the schools, their wages are increased, and again that is putting pressure on their budget. So is there going to be any movement from the department within that formula? Thank you.
Let me take that.
Keep answers as succinct as possible, because everyone else still keen to get in and we're conscious of everyone's time. So. I'll
do that. Let me take the last one first on pay. At this stage, there's no plans to introduce a voluntary redundancy scheme, and that has been there in the past, where sometimes those who are at the top of their pay scale and they're at a certain age are able to retire early, and then you can bring in a younger student that isn't paid the same. So at this stage, there isn't a plan to introduce such a scheme in place, so that won't really give comfort to those schools that maybe are asking for that. In terms of the other two around the costs from EA for repairs and maintenance, one that has been raised with me, yes, sometimes a school will say I can source this myself and I can get it for this amount, or I can procure this piece of equipment, and there are different legal responsibilities that are frustrating to people that EA are having to operate under. But Suzanne manages both the SEP and the issue around repair and maintenance for me. So.
Thanks very much. I'll just pick up on the Skill Enhancement Programme first. As you rightly say, we're not moving any new school enhancement projects into construction, and that at present we paused those last April, and we haven't been able to move them on just due to the lack of budget. But what I do want to give you an assurance about is that the Minister has agreed that all of those schemes are continuing in planning, so they haven't just been parked at a particular point in the process, and then they're continuing through all the stages, which are feasibility study, business case, outline design, getting their planning permission. So they're all dressed up and ready to go to procurement whenever the funding is there and is available. So we're in the budget negotiation process at the minute. We need to see what the budget is next year. There's many excellent schemes within the School Enhancement Programme, which is a super programme because it allows you to address those curriculum deficiencies that the Minister referenced in schools without the significant costs of a major new school programme, and it can have a huge impact on children's teaching and learning. So just to give you that reassurance that those schools are progressing. Just to pick up on the point about maintenance, one point I wanted to just address there was we have, in terms of the special schools estate, for the first time ring-fenced £5 million of annual resource maintenance for special schools this year. And I think given we've 39 special schools, that's huge levels of investment. Those schools, because they don't have delegated budgets, are entirely reliant on the Education Authority, even for their tenant maintenance that the rest of our schools would do themselves. So that they have a backlog there, but that ring-fenced money, it's going to be so important, and already I think the impact of that's been felt on the ground, and we plan to bring that forward in the next financial year as well. In terms of the costs, the Minister rightly referenced, it is a different delivery model in terms of what EA provides, but I think the charging that is probably most impacting on people at the minute is around some of those increased costs, particularly around grounds maintenance, where unfortunately the service has had to be subsidised year on year, and just given the overall block position around the EA block grant, that isn't able to take place anymore. So schools are being asked to meet those charges, and I recognise there's an issue there, and that's something that we can have a look at. The other issue about the maintenance is we want to get on the front foot. Our maintenance budget last year at the outset was £20 million across the whole of the state, our resource maintenance budget. 10-15 years ago it was £35 million. It's been progressively squeezed because of the funding cuts to education. So it is an area that needs significantly more investment, because maintenance helps you avoid larger capital issues. If you get the maintenance right at the front end, you stop the problems escalating. So it is something that we're really, really aware of, and we know the need to plan maintenance and to get on the front foot about it, but it does all come back down to the funding issue. And unfortunately, while the education budget position is like it is, maintenance is an area that really has felt the squeeze, you know.
I come in here just to move on to the next questioner. So I know both Cathy and Kate are keen to ask questions in the same area. So if I bring Cathy in first, and then Kate just come in after each other.
Thanks very much, Chair. Minister, first of all, I welcome that you have outlined childcare as a priority. Unfortunately, though, the feeling that I'm getting from the sector is that there's not enough urgency around it. I do, again, welcome any support for the sector, and you mentioned interim measures, but the reality is that we shouldn't be needing interim measures. We have been waiting on a childcare strategy for a long, long time. What I want to try and get an understanding of is, you have mentioned, and again, a welcome, a bespoke model, but can we get any indication of what that model will look like? We heard as a committee there not very long ago from Employers for Childcare on the shortcomings of what's happening in England and the learnings that needs to be taken from there. We also, and there's various members on the APG for childcare here. We've heard about the Scottish model, we've heard about the Southern model, and the positives and the negatives around that. Can we get some more information as to what the modelling will look like? And I do understand that there will be costed options and there will be a process, but can we get more indication of that? The other thing is around the cross-departmental working group. Again, I do welcome that, and it very clearly crosses other departments. We only need to look at childminders as an example. They feel, and again we heard from them as a committee, that they don't know where to turn. They don't know whether they need to turn to health, education, where it is, but ultimately childcare falls under your remit. So I do welcome that that's there. But as I say, it does ultimately fall under your remit. Where is the urgency with that group? Has that group met yet? And what will the priorities be for that group? I don't want to take up any more time because I know Kate has other childcare questions as well. But if I could get some sort of information around that.
Well, it covers a wide range of issues, as you've pointed out, Cathy, in terms of early years and childcare. And I mentioned in my opening remarks, I think there's two important strands to this. There's one is around affordable childcare and early years, and those two often will overlap as well. So, for example, I want to move to standardised provision for all 3 to 4 year olds. Currently, 40% of children get full-time places in a nursery school. 60% of children are only getting 12.5 hours. I would like to move that to 22.5 hours for every child. And ultimately, I would like to get to the point where within those settings, we can be looking at 30 hours provision. So that is one aspect that would sit completely within my department, and we've been carrying out a survey around what providers are in a position to immediately move to that. Not everybody is able to do that, but there'll be more information that I'll be making publicly available in due course around the standardised approach to it. I also said around stabilising some of our providers. So, I met with the Greater Belfast Collective of Sure Start providers, and I know firsthand in my own constituency the excellent work that Sure Start does for children at that very early years, where you can identify issues and link in with health and others. I think Sure Start does excellent work, but they're under pressure, and some are looking at services diminishing. I need to stabilise that. I've included a bid to allow me to do that, which the Department of Health administer, but my department funds. But I also want to increase that, because Sure Start only operates within a limited number of settings across Northern Ireland. So I want to build upon that and roll it out to other areas, because it largely focuses in those areas where there is disadvantage and need that exists. So I would like to build upon that. I've also engaged and reached out to the Treasury in terms of that 20% tax allowance, which people know is capped at a certain level towards each child. I think that we should be looking to increase that provision, and that is something that we've reached out to Treasury to see, is that a more immediate measure that we may be able to provide support to. So I've been engaging with officials around this. I would hope to be able to have some interim measures that I can look at shortly after Easter. So there's been work that's been going on around what I think this should look like, but I'm not there yet in terms of shaping it, and I need to then engage with other ministerial colleagues around my own views on this. But I would hope that shortly after Easter I'll be able to do that. There's also stakeholder engagements being set up with some of those interested groups that are rightly campaigning on this issue. So I've already been out at Sure Start providers, and I'll be going to other providers just to see the issues that they have. And I'm keen to hear from them, and people. There's different views around the affordable childcare. Is that something that you give directly to parents? What would be the criteria? Is that something that you give to providers as opposed to directly to parents? But providers will also say to me, it isn't just about helping us, because we actually can't get the workforce. So it's no point in giving us additional funding if we actually can't recruit people in. Extra money to pay for something's great, but we actually need to get the workforce. So they're just a few of the issues that we're looking at, but I would hope to be able to provide something more definitive shortly after the Easter break. Well, not that I'm taking an Easter break, after the public Easter recess.
Can I just follow one really short? Yeah. No, I agree with you in terms of the the work that's done there, but it is a postcode lottery, and that's the reality of it. There might be somebody who lives, there might be neighbours, and one is entitled to, can get into the Sure Start facility and others can't. And again, we have Siobhan O'Neill here, the mental health champion, with us later, and we've rehearsed the SEN issues. And in every conversation we have around those, it's early intervention. Where can we really get earlier than within childcare settings? So I do welcome that in terms of the Sure Start. I just would like to err the caution and reiterate the listening to the sector in terms of the 30 free hours and where we need to go with that, because it is something that we hear day and daily with their concerns around that. And again, in terms of the workforce strategy, I think you'll hear that in every single setting that you visit as well. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Kaden.
Thank you, Chet. Thank you, Minister. You won't be surprised that I'm going to ask questions about childcare as well. I welcome the commitment of yourself and executive colleagues, and I think what I'm just concerned about is it's right that we look at short-term and then the long-term strategy. I'm concerned that there isn't a timeline for it. Are you able to provide a timeline for short-term intervention, which includes, you said after Easter there'll be a report, but my understanding is the short-term interventions you're looking at are stabilisation and expansion of preschool. Is there any other kind of interim support that you're looking at before an affordable childcare scheme is rolled out?
There's an affordability piece that I've asked officials to consider as well. Is there a means by which we can provide some financial assistance, and that is part of the short-term consideration that I'm trying to bring forward, and that will be shortly after Easter.
And is that the task force? The task force are looking at the childcare strategy, but are they also looking at the short-term interventions? Yes. Okay.
So there's been a degree of prioritisation. Obviously, there's some short-term because I need to be able to feed that in to the budgetary process because, as I indicated in the Assembly, this is a new scheme, and it's not new. It will build upon some things that are existing, and you're also looking at creating some things that don't exist, and therefore, whilst the 400 million has been out there, that would be something that you would associate with a long-term, fully comprehensive strategy that will take time, which I think everyone accepts, to develop with all of the relevant stakeholders and departments. But I need to be able to bid for the short-term interim measures, and I need to make sure that I'm feeding that into that budget process, that we get a budget set at the end of April.
Okay. I suppose that 400 million is really based on full uptake, and it will be expensive. I'd be keen to see costings of, and that's maybe something the task force would look at as well, what not investing in childcare will cost. One thing that I am nervous about is that the standardisation of preschool is really important, and everyone agrees with that. I'm worried that because we're focusing on the number 30, that moving to 22.5 hours and then eventually 30 is going to be seen as delivering on childcare provision, and I don't think that preschool and childcare are the same thing, and I'm wondering what your views are on that.
I don't disagree with that assessment. Obviously that's 3 to 4 years, but if you were able to do everything, you need to be doing it, people would say, from naught. Certainly 6-9 months upwards as people look to that preschool, nursery day or childminder type provision. If you're wanting to make that early intervention, we shouldn't be waiting until they're in nursery school at 3 and 4 years of age. So but all of that, as you move 3 to 4 years and you work back towards earlier and earlier, I think that's the right thing to do, but that will come with an investment that is needed. And I don't like using the word cost around this, because I agree with you on this. I think we all agree the earlier you can intervene and provide support, the better the outcome for the child, and often you don't need to have a significant intervention by the state later in life, and therefore it's a win-win whenever you go for that much earlier intervention.
Yeah, absolutely. Late intervention costs 537 million a year, I think, which is far more than that. I suppose the final thing that
be very quick,
yeah. And it's not. I'll move away from childcare very quickly. Minister, I'm really concerned about children in contingency accommodation, asylum seeker and refugee children, and I am terrified that in 10-15 years we're going to be having an inquiry into the impact of children living in this kind of accommodation, and they are being moved from accommodation to houses, back into hotels, and their school is being disrupted. Can your department look into what more the EA and the department can be doing to support these children, because I think that it hasn't been looked at enough, and I'm very concerned about their well-being and the disruption to school that accommodation is having. So I think communities and TEO, it's a piece for everyone.
Yeah, it's an important one. I'll bring Lindsay in just.
Yes.
Have to be brief, unfortunately, and it is important.
Thank you, Kate. And yes, we work very closely with both TEO in terms of their strategic response around the placement of children, and then EA at an operational level with the housing executives. We have highlighted the range of concerns that you've rightly brought to our attention, just in terms of what are home office policies, it has to be said, in terms of the movement of children, often with very little notice, and it can be very difficult for the EA then to secure school placements, but we can give you the commitment we'll continue to work very closely with both TEO and EA around that, and then highlighting those concerns.
Well, and one from my own family's experience, which frustrated me as a constituency MLA, was even we had a Ukrainian family that my parents hosted, and whenever it came to accessing the transport provision for a bus pass, we had the children in the same school, and then when it came to moving, they were in the Dixon Plan area, and they wanted to stay and go to the school there, but your closest school's in Lisburn, and then they wouldn't cover the change in transport. Now, for that family, that was a significant amount of money, and I was deeply frustrated with the response that I got from TEO and the Department of Education, because I think people who come here are coming under very difficult circumstances, and we should be making sure they don't encounter even more barriers whenever they're here. So that is one that I will engage further on, Kate.
Thank you.
Right, we have a big agenda ahead of us, so I'm going to go Cara, Danny, Robbie in that order, and it will be a question and answer. One question each and answer. Yeah. You need to be
Quick
brief.
ones, I'll be quick.
You'll have to be quick.
Minister, firstly, thank you so much for being here today, and I appreciate your answers so far. My first question just pertains to when we're talking about children with special educational needs and safeguarding them and supporting them. I'd like to touch on the issue of restraint and seclusion, and just ask your department for an update on that. I know recently I spoke with a really passionate parent who's advocated for this for a very long time, who's touched on the issue of non-verbal children, and just that can often cause more difficulties in communicating that they've experienced inappropriate restraint or seclusion. So just an update from yourselves on that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I've provided some answers around that, and there's one area around the restraint that I'm waiting to get more engagement just with officials on. But yes, I'm not sure who's the lead on it, sorry.
Yeah, so I can give you a quick update on that, Cara. You're right, really emotive and complex issues. This is an area we're working incredibly closely with the Department of Health and other health colleagues around in terms of the guidance. I think it's about striking that balance between what is right and absolutely in the best interest of the child, and what also is deliverable within an education setting, because often an education setting is very different to that of a health setting. So we would hope to be putting fuller advice to the Minister very shortly on foot of the consultation, so that we'll be able to publish a report shortly around that once the Minister has had a chance to consider.
Do we have a timeline on that report?
In the coming weeks we'll be putting something to the Minister.
Thank you very much. And then just my final question, Minister, is just for yourself. So we've talked at length in this Assembly and the Executive about violence against women and girls, and we know that Northern Ireland is one of the most dangerous places to be a woman. So I think, myself, if we want to tackle sexual and physical violence towards women in our society, it's really important that we have that early intervention and tackling those sort of sexist and harmful attitudes towards women and girls. Minister, with the role of education, how do you think we can tackle things like this, things like rape culture, rape myths, and those kind of harmful attitudes towards women, and how do you see the role of education in our classrooms tackling that?
Hugely important role for education, and that's where schools, and particularly governors, of which I sat on 3 school boards of governors, 2 primary, 1 post-primary, need to ensure that as part of the teaching that's going on, that they're addressing these issues. And that's often a space which is safe for people to have those conversations and discussions. So I think there's a big role for education in respect of that. We will always support schools in how they want to teach and what areas of the curriculum they want to cover. And then it's for schools to make sure that they have those policies in place. And the boards of governors will have an important role to play in that. So I think it's important. I think it's also important for schools to make sure that they are covering these issues and they do it sensitively, and the governors take a particular interest in it, which is certainly something in the post-primary school that we as governors always took an interest in.
Is it something you yourself would like to see mandatory, just this key aspect here about tackling violence against women and girls in secondary education? And do you think there's a role for our universities to have a mandatory aspect in those early first few days at university to ensure that pupils or students get the chance to learn that key information around ending violence against women and girls?
Well, instinctively, you would want to cover this. Then I look at the way in which our education system operates, and we always give a large degree of autonomy for our boards of governors to make sure that they can cover things. So some may believe this issue should be mandatory, and others will say to me, I also want this to be mandatory and this to be mandatory. What we do as a department is support the education system, support our schools, and give them the flexibility so that they can cover these issues. I would expect them to be covering these issues, but that we support them in doing that. That's where schools need to make sure that they cover it, but we always respect the autonomy of a school whenever it comes to how they're going to deliver the curriculum and cover areas within their responsibilities.
Do you think there is that role in universities then as well, for them to take a role?
You're inviting me to go into another minister's responsibility.
But in your own personal opinion.
Listen, across the board, it's a societal issue in terms of tackling violence against women and girls. I look at previous times in legislation. I took forward, when I was chairman of the Justice Committee, the criminalisation of the purchases of sexual services. The Justice Minister at the time actually didn't support me. I'll leave that one there. But I recognised that we needed to send a message to wider society that women are not a product or a commodity that can be bought. And whenever I was in a school and we debated this issue, it was really striking the attitudes that were presented by some boys who were saying, oh, we should be able to do it. And the girls were the first one up and saying, absolutely not. And so there was a discussion around that. So as a society, these are issues that we need to be addressing in whatever place that we're in. And there's a place for education to manage this in the same way. Of course, there's a place in our universities for all of this, and I don't think I'm going to say something on that Conor Murphy wouldn't disagree with me on.
I'll come in at that point.
Thank you. That's me. Just I'm mindful if they don't get it in secondary education, maybe universities or further education could be the place for that conversation.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think we're going to hear from the mental health champion today and our young people who are here, and I think they may be different views as to whether or not the leaving this to the discretion of schools is the right approach, and whether we do need something on a mandatory basis. But I'll hand over to Danny and Robbie, and I emphasise the clock really is ticking here.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. It's really around youth funding, and if I had more time, I would sit here and convince you that it should be a number one priority for additional funding. But if I don't have that time, and I know budgets are very, very tight and decisions to be made, I suppose my ask is a review of how the community and voluntary sector are funded by the Education Authority. And I raised this a couple of weeks ago because we had a number of correspondence when it came to specifications. But just to set a wee bit of the backstory to it as well, we have had a number of motions come through in the last couple of weeks and good debates. And I mentioned yesterday Monkstown Boxing Club, they run their own holiday hunger programmes. And a programme in my own constituency run by St Youth Club from the urban villages. That's now gone. That ends this week and it's not coming back. St Patrick's Day, Feed on the Street, funded by Belfast City Council. So there's all different wee pots that the community and voluntary sector have to rely on, but by getting it, the work that they then contribute to our communities is far and above the way to go, because we hear that they're always praised, but they're the ones always fighting for the funding. And it was only last night, these questions would have been very different. It was only last night that their core funding letter of offer came in, and it runs out in 11 days time. So I welcome that they got that last night, but the programme funding specifications aren't out yet. We haven't seen them yet. I believe they're going to go live on the 1st of May, I hope. But it's setting that this is staff, this is people who are having to really no job security or leaving the industry.
I'll ask you to get to the question, Danny.
The question's really in the review, but it's set in the backdrop till it is because they're not on, I suppose, it was said, a level footing. They're not in the same level footing as in the statutory bodies. The EA do great work as well, but it's that insecurity that the community and voluntary sector are facing. And within that specification, there was a 2%, I only had a quick read at it, 2% uplift for a cost of living crisis. But within that, there are the management committees are going to have to find money for the uplift in JNC and NJC pay scales. That's pressures that are going to be coming on to youth clubs. And in my own youth club that I volunteer with, we made decisions at Christmas when it was really cold to change our days or reduce our hours because there wasn't any money in the reserves to then kick on to put the heating on. So there are challenges, and it's just that it's a simple ask, and it is just to review how our community and voluntary youth clubs are being funded. And because the EA still to this day are their funder, their collaborator, their assessor, and up until quite recently they also chaired the lags and rags, so there's a real accountability question there as well. So that's me in the nutshell, but it does need that backdrop to it. They're doing great work, but they struggle when it comes to funding. They really do.
Well, it's a good question, and you've rightly set the context and how you've placed that question. and it draws on my own experience of youth provision at a local level. And I was not happy with the outworkings of the change in youth services by EA. It affected a youth group in my own constituency in Moira. Robbie and I worked on unsuccessfully to try and secure. And I didn't find the engagement with the EA youth service to be a positive one as a constituency MLA. And so that concerned me, and I came into this post with that experience around youth service provision. And there is that competing tension between statutory and voluntary. And I think where the community and the voluntary can deliver that service, then they should deliver it, and the statutory should step back. Right now, EA is operationally responsible. My department will give them the funding. But I believe that where the community and the voluntary is able to deliver these services, they are often best placed to do it and will provide greater value for money in how they go about delivering these services. So that's the general principle by which I'm going to be approaching youth services. But it is an area that EA is responsible for in how they account and administer and manage the expenditure in this area. But I agree we should support it, and it's an area that we're looking at in terms of EA as to what are the outcomes and the processes and how they go about delivery.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. And just a wee quick one, just to flag up, I'm sure, Lindsay, you probably it's already came across your desk. It's the TTP funding. I know it's DOJ, but that runs out the 31st of March as well, and then, high risk areas and children.
Well, the funding, Danny,
I think we'll have to maybe follow that one up in writing.
I'll follow it up.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah,
we'll follow it up.
And to Robbie, time is absolutely of the essence
You're right up
here.
until you said time there, Chair. So if you I'll just turn my back to you.
Just conscious of other witnesses, Robbie.
I'm going to give you three questions, but I'm going to give them short form, Minister, and then if you make sure you have a pen to make sure you don't miss them and have to come back to them.
I'll do that.
When you first spoke in the chamber, I raised the issue of child rights impact assessments. So paediatrics and the health would be the first place that is something that I would like to see established. Could you tell me if the department had any discussions in regard to how they will address policy legislative change and maybe employ a template which is child rights centred? And I'll give you an example of where that might help you. When we bring legislation, whether it's a private member's bill or your own, we shouldn't be taking away from any child. Any one child to give to another child. You do not help any child up by putting another child down. So the second question will be with regard to the independent review. There's a chat in there around GCSEs and their value as a terminal exam. It's a very interesting piece. I don't know if you've grappled with that yet, but I'd like to see if the department are looking at moving away from that. The recommendation there would indicate that the advice is to maybe definitely look at something different at age 15, 16 for those exams, and also there's not enough chat, and this isn't this isn't about you, Minister, this is about the whole executive, about looked after children, about what is your and the department's strategy and level of importance going to be given to ensuring that looked after children are not forgotten about, and indeed that they have the best opportunities in life. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Robbie. This will have to be very brief because
Yes,
we're way over time.
I appreciate that, and I think on those three, I probably can't give you brief answers around child impact assessments, and what I'm hearing from you is will we in the same way carry out a rural impact assessment? Do we carry out a child impact assessment when it comes to policies and education? Of course, the default for me is everything that we're doing has the child at its centre. How you measure that, I think, is an interesting question, and can you encapsulate that in some formal structure around a child impact assessment? I will come back to you on that. GCSEs, is that where you're going to the
independent review? So there was a recommendation from there to suggest that perhaps they were designed at a time when a lot of children were leaving school at that stage, but we now have more children who are doing further and higher education, and there's more of an emphasis on A levels and other vocational qualifications. And perhaps this is the inference, we're putting young people under pressure at an age when we don't need to. It doesn't actually bring huge amounts of value. I'm certainly not asked. I don't have GCSEs, but that was a different generation when maybe it wasn't just so.
Yeah, and there is the issue around some of the changes that could be happening in England around recognising qualifications, which I picked up on with the UK Secretary of State for Education as well. But Suzanne, do you want to pick up on
Lindsay too.
I think the GCSE issue is within the context of broader issues that we'll be grappling with over the next while around qualifications reform. We'll be putting advice to the Minister around that advanced British standard that he had referenced in terms of what's happening in England. That's at A level, which has been a surprising development because I think other jurisdictions would have started with GCSEs. That's the issue that's been highlighted in the independent review. But I think it'll be just one issue that the Minister will be considering within a broader suite of advice around qualifications reform.
And on looked after children.
And looked after children, we can come back to you in writing with a fuller response, but just to say we support and fund the Children Looked After service within the Education Authority that provides direct support to schools in terms of the children looked after population. But we'll be able to come back to you in writing with more detailed breakdown in terms of how many schools are working with and the activities that they're involved in with those children.
The final piece on the looked after children piece, it's in the existing programme for government in terms of, and they work with the universities to try and increase the number of young people from a looked after background to attain university, and it's, we need to be ensuring if that's a high level government priority, the Department of Education are making sure. I just want to make sure we're getting traction in there. If that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Minister, and to Lindsay and Suzanne for attending as well today. I'm hoping it is the first of a number of engagements, and thank you for being so generous with your time and plenty there to follow up on.
Well, thank you, Chairman and members, and as I said at the start, I'm happy to make myself available to the committee whenever you so desire.
That is appreciated.
Thank you very much.
I might regret saying that.
Thank you.
While we move on to our next agenda item, I'll just pass to the clerk to deal with any actions arising from that, and then we'll bring in our next witness.
Thanks everyone, that was very comprehensive. What I've noted in terms of follow-up in the questions that weren't just today, I have the costings that Kate was requiring as opposed to what not investing in childcare will cost, so specific costings. Information about contingency accommodation for refugee and asylum seeker children from not only DE but the Executive Office and the Department for Communities, and just to give the committee a bit of an understanding of where the Home Office stops and the devolved institutions and responsibilities begin. A follow-up then on Danny's question with regard to arrangements to anticipate the expiry of TTP funding. Robbie then had some more information on the likelihood of child impact assessments.
Child rights impact assessments, because it's tied to the UNCRC, so it's quite specific. Thank you.
Okay, so we could maybe ask if the department has any plans to incorporate the UNCRC as well, which has been done in Scotland recently. And then I'll listen again to the issue about the GCSEs, the utility of GCSEs as a final exam. And the last question that I have noted is that what will be the priority of looked after children among the Minister's objectives? Yeah. Does that sound like I've covered?
Also the timeline for the childcare strategy. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, that's all fine with me. So that brings us on to item 6 on the agenda. So I'm delighted to invite the mental health champion, Professor Siobhan O'Neill, and Dr. Nicole Bond, research officer for the mental health champion. So while you just get yourselves settled there, apologies for the running behind time, and thank you for your patience in waiting for this item. It was the first opportunity we'd had to engage with the Minister, so it was always going to be a challenge to keep that to time, so appreciate your patience.
It's absolutely fine. No, and that was important and very, very useful, so no problem at all. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll really hand over to you for your presentation, which would say up to 10 minutes, and then we'll move to questions from there.
I've already been scoring bits out. You'll be relieved to know. Okay, so thanks for inviting me here today. I'm covering 3 main recommendations for discussion. The first one is the implementation of the recommendations of the Independent Review of Education and the Fair Start report. Second one is the full delivery of the framework for emotional health and wellbeing in education in all schools in Northern Ireland, with a multi-year budget for that. And the third one is around high quality inclusive relationships and sexuality education for all our children and young people. So let's go into the first one. Social inequalities and poverty have a fundamental and lasting direct impact on mental health, and they lead to ACEs and adversities, which in turn cause the trauma that predicts mental illness, that causes mental illness. And whilst we do need that programme for government focusing on wellbeing, and childcare and anti-poverty strategies are necessary, the role of the education system in perpetuating the inequalities that cause mental illness must not be ignored. The recommendations of the Independent Review of Education and the Plan for the Single Education System, which values diversity and offers choice to parents, would give children and young people the opportunity to develop the skills, qualifications and the social capital, and enable them to stay healthy, achieve their goals and thrive in a prosperous society. The implementation of the following recommendations are vital in terms of the mental health of our children and young people specifically, and are also consistent with the recommendations in Fair Start. So there are alignments between those two reports. First one is the expansion of early years education, specifically Sure Start, and I'm pleased that the Minister's covered that. Second one is the modification of the transition process, and again, that's something I've spoken at length about previously. Third is the ensuring assessment supports progression, links with your question, Robbie, as well. So that's about the pressure that young people are under in that 16 plus age group, and how we can better meet their needs there. The transformation of SEN provision to create equity, again, has been covered, and valuing the education workforce, the full workforce. So I'm going to start with this bit that I put into a lot of my talks. The relationships and attachments in the first few years of life predict well-being across the lifespan. And poor attachment and childhood adversities, or ACEs, affect the developing brain's response to stress. And that results in behaviour patterns which are characteristic of the mental illness that we see. So the interventions that we provide in the early years in the education settings are cost effective in addressing the negative impact of early adversity. And they can also transform children's educational outcomes. So investment in this area in the context of childcare strategy and in the early intervention and prevention plan and mental health strategy will pay dividends and have a life-changing impact on vulnerable children and their families. So moving on to transfer. So I've spoken publicly many times about the harmful impact of transfer from the current system of transfer from primary to secondary school on the mental health of individual children, and also the role that this plays in perpetuating the economic inequalities, and also the harm caused by the myth that this test measures innate ability and somehow sorts children into appropriate schools. The academic experts who conducted the independent review provide a clear pathway to reform this system whilst maintaining parent choice and respecting the diversity of sectors, which is very important. This needs to be implemented as a matter of urgency, and I think they put that as an urgent action to be done within 3 years. So in my evidence to the independent review, I also highlighted the impact of the focus of a narrow range of educational qualifications on mental health. Again, the review's recommendations address this and should be implemented so that all children can set and achieve their own goals. The current situation with regards to support for children and young people with SEN is nothing short of shameful. These children and their families are extremely vulnerable to poor mental health, and the evidence of the impact that the lack of support plays on their mental health is very clear. So I'm adding my voice to that of the Children's Commissioner and many, many other groups, including the families themselves, to plead with you to implement the recommendations from the Too Little Too Late report, and to prioritise funding for the implementation of the SEN framework, to legislatively support current guidance on the use of restraint and seclusion in education, and fully implement the action plan within the Fair Start report. The needs of our most vulnerable young people and their families are not being met. They have waited long enough for these reforms to be actioned. And if we create equity in the education system and give every child that fair chance, all of society will benefit socially and economically. So moving on to the second point, full delivery of the framework for emotional health and wellbeing in education in all schools in Northern Ireland. So whilst the rates of poor mental health in children and young people are high, and I can take questions on that, so I've cut out a full section there on the rates and what they are and what that means. Many of these cases reflect the high levels of anxiety which has become a feature of adolescence in the past decade. So I'm also concerned about the rise in young people self-identifying as having poor mental health. where normal stress and anxiety response is misinterpreted as mental illness. So there's a growing recognition now that efforts to raise awareness of mental illness can actually promote self-diagnosis and the misinterpretation of milder distress as a mental health problem. So this can lead to the exacerbation of symptoms and behaviours that are not conducive to good well-being, including rumination, self-labelling, public disclosure and social media, all of this stuff around mental illness or assumed mental illness and symptoms of mental illness. And for this reason, we just need to proceed with caution when we're talking about mental health in schools and what we do in schools. The universal mental health interventions, particularly those that focus on mental illness, need to be carefully evaluated and the unintended consequences measured. And there's some studies now showing that in some cases interventions can increase symptoms in young people and cause adverse effects. However, young people do need to have universal access to education about their physiological stress response and how to cope with stress, as well as how to manage their relationships. This preventative approach can mitigate against mental ill health. And as I pointed out to previous committees and in my evidence to the Independent Review of Education, these aspects of mental health are already on the curriculum. The focus needs to turn now to high quality delivery. Again, I call for equal emphasis to be placed on the measurement and improvement of the well-being of children and young people in education as it is on academic attainment. So I commend ETI for their work in this area and for the progress towards that inspection framework, which will consider the ability of all our schools to develop the conditions required to nurture young people's well-being. As a starting point, though, I would recommend that all our secondary schools have pupil councils which consider well-being. And these councils would need to have a meaningful influence in school policies and practices. Each school should also have a named individual to drive forward a whole school approach to promoting well-being, supported by an excellent leadership team. And we need to look at governors just in the light of the last conversation, you know, the ability of governors to set the tone in terms of leadership and the qualifications that they would have too. The evidence also points to bullying as a cause of poor mental health, and anti-bullying interventions are cost effective in preventing mental illness. So we must ensure that the well-being of groups who are at higher risk is protected. And specifically, the evidence points to these groups being children, young people with a disability, neurodivergent children and young people, those with special educational needs, children and young people from black and ethnic minority communities, refugees and asylum seekers, care experienced children and young people, pupils who are LGBT+, and the 1 in 5 children who live in poverty. Finally, a focus on wellbeing should place a strong emphasis on arts, music, physical activity and play in the school setting. These activities all have a powerful impact on wellbeing, and indeed many of the effective treatments for mental illness and trauma in children and young people are the therapies which harness the creative arts to generate powerful changes in mental health. In terms of addressing mental illness and early intervention for those with symptoms, we must ensure that the current programmes that provide support and therapies to young people in the school setting are maintained, and that the framework is funded in full and consistently implemented in all schools. The framework has the potential to ensure that young people learn how to identify and respond appropriately to their own feelings, care for their emotional health, and identify when additional support is required. So the programmes and services that are in the framework will empower schools to support young people and connect to a wider system of mental health care. Teachers should be able to competently manage distress and crisis, and then be able to access early intervention or treatments external to education when young people require them. The approach to this can't be piecemeal. Full funding and a multi-year budget again are necessary. There's been much progress in the last 3 years. Many of the specific supports are now available, and emotional wellbeing teams are present in many schools to support them, to support that focus on wellbeing. These provisions must be expanded, and ultimately legislation may be necessary to mandate the prioritisation and embedding of emotional health and wellbeing practice and resources across all schools. The framework also facilitates the early intervention work and strengthened links between education, health and the community and voluntary sector to support young people and their families. And finally, in this part, the consistent delivery of therapeutic interventions, including counselling, is also essential. So, moving on to RSE. As I've stated previously, relationships are fundamental to good mental health and well-being. And our own studies in the Mental Health Champions Office show that relationships with peers and parents are key causes of stress and worry for young people. The rates of poor mental health in adolescents are much higher in girls, and the evidence points to the link with misogyny and sexism, as well as school pressure, difficulties in peer relationships and social perfectionism. I fully support the position of the Family Planning Agency and other agencies who state that RSE should develop positive values and attitudes and equip young people to enjoy relationships based on mutual respect, trust, negotiation and fulfilment. Many of Northern Ireland's most vulnerable young people have not had exposure to role models for healthy relationships. As a result, they can have difficulty navigating consent and recognising and responding to abuse and violence in their own relationships. Ignorance around these issues is harmful to mental health. The evidence shows that high proportions of young people in Northern Ireland are engaging in risky sexual activity, and a strong, consistent RSE programme is necessary to reduce the health risks and to protect young people's well-being. Research conducted by Belfast Youth Forum found that young people described RSE they received in school to be basic, unhelpful, useless and biased. Several studies show that pupils would like to know more about LGBT plus identities and that these subjects were delivered poorly or not at all. It is therefore extremely worrying that in the consultation document on the proposals for RSE in schools, that it states that schools have flexibility to decide on the content of their taught RSE programme and how to deliver it. And they also say it's a matter for teachers to decide how the curriculum should be delivered, which resources to use and which topics should be covered. These policies may result in young people in some schools not receiving certain curriculum content and inconsistency in delivery across the region, and it may even limit young people's access to the factual information that they need to make informed decisions. Consistency is key not just across the region but also within schools. The consultation also states that the change in legislation made by the Secretary of State does not prevent teachers and pupils being able to continue to discuss and comment on moral and ethical issues which may arise in relation to the content of teaching and learning resources developed by SIA. Again, this is a cause of concern, as it may be interpreted as permitting schools to provide a moral commentary regarding issues such as sexual orientation, gender identity and family structure. This type of commentary is harmful and results in children and young people feeling ashamed, stigmatised and marginalised. In order to promote well-being and in fact to promote peace building, schools should be places that celebrate diversity. Schools need to proactively promote inclusion, particularly for LGBT plus young people, many of whom are bullied and report feeling marginalised and unsafe. The conditions and autonomy offered to schools quoted in the consultation document will encourage schools to continue their current level of implementation of RSE without fully adopting the updated resources, and the mental health of all our young people will suffer as a consequence. It is of course vital that parents and caregivers are fully informed about the curriculum for RSE and have access to information and the resources delivered. This will promote the continuation of these important discussions at home. However, it is concerning that the consultation response report notes that provision will be made to allow exclusion on specified elements. Children should not be prevented from accessing this necessary and valuable education. Put simply, these policy proposals do not align with a rights-based approach and they need to be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you. And you covered a lot in a very short period of time.
Rattled through it.
And I certainly went and I really do appreciate your time with committee today. And when I was reviewing the papers in advance of committee, it was hard to know where to begin, even in terms of questioning, because there is just so much here that interfaces with our work as a committee. So I'll go in with one question and then just over to other members, maybe ask if we could all stick with one question. I wanted to pick up on your last topic, which was RSE. I think just in relation to what was sort of covered, I think when Carol had been raised with the Minister, in particular around tackling violence against women and girls. And I felt in that answer we got the first half, which was it should be a real priority in education, and then the second half was but it ultimately should be up to schools to decide what they could include and don't include. So I'd be really interested to hear your assessment of that response from the Minister, and in terms of how much independence do you feel schools should have in this space? versus the rights that children have that children and young people have to a comprehensive RSE programme in schools?
No, it should be mandatory and it should be inspected. The quality of it needs to be inspected and reported. And this should be part of a mandatory curriculum. This is about young people's health and safety. It's that important. It's about mental health and it's about preventing violence and sexual violence and violence against women and girls. It's about giving young people the skills to navigate issues of consent. So it's so important that they can manage their relationships and that they communicate openly in their relationships. And so I believe it should be mandatory and there shouldn't be flexibility for schools, and in fact it needs to be inspected.
Really helpful. We're going to be running a bit of a mini inquiry into RSE and would be delighted to have you back, I'm sure, as a committee to hear your views on that subject in more detail. But that's
absolutely very keen to contribute, yeah.
That's very helpful, thank you. Deputy Chair, are you looking to come in at this
Yes,
stage?
I did. Siobhan, in 2021, when we last spoke at committee, you agreed with my assessment that there was going to be a tsunami of mental health coming out after COVID. And I suppose when we see the figures now that are going through the roof on absenteeism, it sort of bears that out, you know. And I think you were there when I was questioning the Minister earlier on about the cuts to various programmes, and Happy Healthy Minds was one of those programmes, and there was a lot of work went in to getting that put in place to help young people with their mental health. So, I mean, what's your view on the fact that that programme was cut, and what impact are those cuts going to have?
So that was not, it was a funded programme, but it wasn't from core funding. So the funding ended and of course the programme ended. I'm still waiting for the evaluation report on Happy Healthy Minds. So we do need that because we need to understand what worked and what we need to change about that. And I know there were some difficulties, particularly in terms of workforce, getting appropriately qualified staff to deliver the interventions in schools. So we do need to look at that. And I know that evaluation report is coming soon. But having said that, I think that counselling and other therapeutic interventions, so in primary school it's not the counselling, usually it's often play therapy, creative therapies, and those are necessary and we need to be able to deliver those in that school setting. So I am keen to see what the proposals are to replace Healthy Happy Minds and to continue to provide therapeutic interventions in schools. And I want the community and voluntary sector to be more involved in the delivery of the framework for emotional health and well-being as well. I think that's a really important element of it. So and also to ensure that whenever these programmes are advertised that and whether they're set out, that we have enough staff to deliver them and that they're set up in such a way that the workforce is there and can access, that the schools can access staff too. So it's a complicated one, but we do need those interventions in schools, and the framework is really strong. It's how we deliver the likes of the interventions that we need through the mechanisms there in the framework.
In a similar vein, the Engage programme, which was set up to help young people who fell behind in their learning during COVID for whatever reason, the funding on that stopped also. I wonder, have you or your team done any appraisal of that programme?
Nicole would know.
We would engage quite heavily with the framework team, and they are aware of both Healthy Happy Minds and Engage, and the fact that it was outside of core funding, so that they recognised the loss. And I suppose there was an equality assessment at the time on all those budget cuts, and came quite clearly that young people were being disadvantaged by the loss of those key services. The position that the Emotional Health and Wellbeing Framework team have at the minute is that the purpose of the framework is an ongoing evaluation of trial and error of which projects work, which projects don't, and have an overall evaluation of that. So things like the Happy Healthy Minds, they want to take the learning from the evaluation. So Happy Healthy Mind version 2 or whatever it called can address some of the issues that come out in that evaluation, should it be workforce or otherwise. Similarly with the Engage report, I think they're and it's in Siobhan's evidence there calling for the multi-year budgets. The struggles that they had and some of the progress that they've made to date has been around staffing, about encouraging people to come across to those shorter term teams when they don't really have the capacity to ensure that they have a budget for their salary for longer than 6 months. So really the multi-year budget is necessary to get those teams up and running in all schools, because even at the minute it's piloted, it's across the area, it's covering some areas, not other, the postcode lottery that you mentioned earlier, and that's not really what the framework aims to do. It aims to be a whole school, whole region approach, but that means that it needs to be embedded in our school system and not just this optional extra that they can buy into or not. But yeah, I think the framework team is very, very clear, and they've put out 2 consultations, one for schools and one for the C&V sector, to actually ask, or questionnaire, sorry, which services our schools are using, which have they lost that they would like to have back, which services in our community are providing resources to our schools, because right now we don't really have that full picture, and everyone can talk about the value of the C&V sector and how much they do with the very little resources that they have, but they're trying to evidence it in a way that they can show how our schools are using it and create that wider discussion around what our education system supports and where that early intervention starts.
Thanks for that. Just one final question. I was in an IOTIS setting recently, school in the high deprivation area, children from difficult backgrounds, domestic violence, addiction issues, some of the kids themselves taking drugs, mental health issues, and so on and so forth. And the principal was telling us many of the children are receiving mental health treatment through CAMS, but often they don't go to their appointments, or they can't get to their appointments, or whatever. And he was saying it would be very beneficial if he could have the support of, say, a mental health practitioner and a social worker, even for one day a week. Now, when we raise these issues with the department, they'll say, well, that's health department or whatever, and the statutory organisations don't seem to be working very well together. But even on the issue of affordability, I mean, can we afford not to have these services in schools?
I think if you look at the framework there, the links are there between health and education, and lots of schools, not lots, a few schools have emotional wellbeing teams in schools, and they're supporting the whole school approach. But the resources really, that is the problem. Some schools are paying for individual staff themselves, social workers, mental health workers. There's lots of different schools, wellbeing practitioners. There's lots of different models there. It's just about who provides the funding for that. Schools have taken it upon themselves in some cases to provide funding from various different sources for that, and there's even charities that are now providing funding for certain schools too. So I would say if we look at the framework, there's the mechanisms and the structures are there to promote that. Not all schools will want that approach. They want, and there should be that flexibility. But what I'm saying is a wellbeing champion in every school would be a very, very positive start, and that could be a teacher, but somebody with a designated role. It doesn't have to be called a wellbeing champion. Somebody with that designated role who looks after that. And ultimately, though, it goes back to the leadership in the school and the governors, and they make the decisions about how the money gets spent and what happens within that school and what's prioritised in terms of the resources they have. So, but these are all things that we would love to have and love to do better. It starts with getting that framework funded and making sure that that's delivered properly across all the schools. That would be a good start there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cara, you had indicated next.
Thank you, Chair. Siobhan, I have 1,000 questions I could ask you, but I'll limit it just to 2. Thank you so much for being here. I think it's just my question is around the RSE aspect, and that's why I raised it with the Minister. Was I think we're seeing this really worrying trend of people going through school, and even when they get to university, even though I know it's not his remit, the concern is they've had no education whatsoever. And I recently spoke with the Feminist Society at Queen's, and what they're advocating for is trying to get mandatory education in the university setting in the first few days of starting a new course, and to try and mitigate what's floods of young people not getting the correct education that they need. I'm mindful we have an SSUNI representative here today, and I know I had went to the launch of their Let Us Learn campaign, looking at the LLW module and identifying if that would be the correct method through which we could educate our young people on RSE, emotional health and well-being, and I'm just wondering what your take is on that. Do you think that would be a good method, because I'm just mindful in the absence of this, education, what we're seeing is, this year the sexual offences were at an all-time high in Northern Ireland, so I think this can act as a real preventative. So just your opinion on that.
Young people are getting an education on this stuff. They're getting it through their computers and their phones and their devices. So if we don't provide an education, that's all that they get. And that is extremely worrying. And there's an assumption that parents are doing this, and I don't know how well equipped lots of parents are. But as I said in my evidence, it's often the most vulnerable young people who aren't getting anything, and all they get is what they get online. And that is actually really scary. I think it's always been a problem. People are now more likely to report it, and maybe that's what's causing the increase. But it is something that we have to do better with. In terms of the LLW curriculum, I don't know. It seems to me like a very, very full curriculum, and it really, for me, it doesn't matter where this happens. And actually, these things shouldn't be restricted to just one subject. It's about that whole school approach. It's about how we treat each other as human beings. It's about respect, it's about friendship, it's about all our relationships. So I think the focus has been very narrow on the sexuality element of it, but actually this is starting from a very young age. It's about how we listen to each other, how we communicate our needs, and what we want and what we don't want, and body boundaries and all of that stuff. So it needs to run right through all elements of education, but I have no particular view on what subject this needs to be delivered on. It just needs to be done well, because our children and young people are reporting difficulties with their friendships. It's causing them distress, even in primary schools. I went to primary school where they had like a friendship club, and that's what their mental health worker was doing, helping young people with friendships and dealing with all of the stuff that goes on at primary school there. So it's so important, and it can't just be restricted to one subject. But look, it is going to have to be tackled in terms of the late adolescence period, when there are certain needs that young people have in terms of relationships and sexuality, and that's going to have to be done well too.
Just on RSE, has the Minister engaged with yourself, or is he open to it? Just on, I'm mindful of the mental health impact if it doesn't take place. Is that something he's been open to? Or
we have a meeting, and that will certainly be on the agenda. It's still very early days, but we have a date in the diary. And the last time I met the Minister, he was health spokesperson, so we didn't discuss that. So this is something that I do want to talk to him about, and any of the groups, particularly the groups who might have concerns around this. And I know there are groups who are against this for various different reasons. So I would reach out to those groups as well to understand more about their concerns, and to see if there's anything we can do there to support their concerns as well. Really,
I just have one small one, if that's okay.
Very
just,
very quick.
It's to do with
that's question 3 we're on, Karen.
I'll try and talk less as well.
I'm just mindful of the adverse childhood experiences aspect of things. We're fantastic with the addiction dual diagnosis APG. I'm just mindful for children who are pupils who have, or perhaps a child of an alcoholic or an addict at home, and they're struggling at home and in the classroom. Is there anything more we can do at this committee to support them, or anything you recommend that we could talk to the department about there to support them?
The early years stuff and the framework. So I say early years, the work that happens with parents, and it's health and education. So the contact that the childcare providers and the Sure Start, that is such an amazing programme. That will make all the difference and help parents who are struggling with trauma. These are trauma-related behaviour that people get engaged in. So it's about those Sure Starts and getting in as early as possible, and even earlier than that through the health system, maternity, perinatal, mental health, all of that too. But that's for another committee. So it's a good question. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Tried to lead by example with one question. Everyone's paid a blind bit of attention. Kathy, over to you.
I promise it is one question. Siobhan, thanks very much. I always find your presentations really, really interesting and engaging. You've heard it mentioned earlier about childcare and childcare settings, and you did rightly so mention Sure Start yourself there. The reality is that childcare is very, very broad. Not everybody can access Sure Start. We've got childminders, playgroups, early years settings, nurseries, that very, very broad. And we've heard it time and again about this early intervention in childcare settings, and I know in speaking to providers, a lot of them can spot signs very, very early on. They're the ones that are maybe spending, very often, maybe during the week, a lot more time with these children than parents or peers. And I just want to get what your view is on that in terms of childcare settings, broadly speaking, and not just in the Sure Start setting. These guys aren't able to make referrals, they're not able to assess things like that, and not able to access training, which I think is very important. And I suppose something similar to what Cara has mentioned, have you had the opportunity to feed into the childcare strategy prior to this minister taking his post, or even since this minister has taken his post?
Okay, so to answer the last, but I haven't engaged on the childcare strategy yet, but we are planning to do this. This is so important. So a childcare strategy is one thing. At the minute there's a lot of unregulated childcare, and that's the bit I'm worried about. So there's informal childcare that's that the parents are having to use because they have no alternative, but that's poorer quality, and that's the worry. And there's in the childcare strategy, I would like to see support for extended family as childcares, if there's some way to do that. And I'm just putting that in. There's a lot of grandparents who are providing childcare, and what happens to them? How can we, and it's a pressure for them in many cases too, but how do we bring them in and bring them on board in some way? But we need to do a whole piece around childcare, and I'll provide a response in terms of childcare in due course, because this does have to be right. But I can say, speaking from experience, my child's with a registered childminder, and the level of care is excellent, and the procedures are good, but I think the cost can be prohibitive there. So we do need to make sure that the childcare is quality, and it's about relational attachments. Relationships runs through all of this, so it's based on relationships there as well, and that's what good quality childcare really looks like.
Yeah, and I think the affordability piece, you're right, it's very often a barrier to some people even accessing childcare, and at times does force, and particularly more so mothers, are forced to stay at home, which has a knock-on impact on their own mental health as well. But I appreciate that, and I would really look forward to seeing what your opinion is around the childcare strategy.
Absolutely. We're here to meet anybody to talk about these things if diaries allow and all that. So absolutely, thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Annie, you're next. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Sean, thanks very much. I'll be very brief. It's just a concern that I have for families with children with special educational needs that come into my office, and I tend to go and meet the support groups. They are exhausted. They're fighting for everything, and even if they're the same age as us, to be blunt, they look 20 years older than me. They're the same age as me. They just look absolutely worn out, and I'm just wondering what concerns that you have for their mental health going forward, because I think it's at a cliff edge right now. I've never seen it as bad with the people come through and looking support from my office.
I couldn't find words powerful enough to communicate. It's a disgrace. It's appalling. It's shameful. It's something that does need to be addressed. And I think we talk about the impact on those young people and every aspect of their life and their mental health and their education, and their carers and their families. And the impact even in the classroom setting where you have children whose needs are not being met, how that then ripples across the whole classroom and affects everybody, and affects the teachers in the schools who know that they could do better if they had the resources to do this. So this is an absolute priority. When you think of priorities, this has got to be near the top. It really does. It's fundamental, and the numbers are increasing. And we have to accept that and deal with that. And I was very concerned about the idea that the pandemic had been associated with that surge. So I'm going off to look now at the data on that to see what interventions would work there, and if there's any nuances there that we need to be aware of. So I'll be returning hopefully to committee to talk about things like that. But yeah, let's get this sorted, and it's great that we have a committee, and hopefully with yourselves and the Minister we can do something there. Thank you.
And I think the committee's been very clear from day one that the issues around mental health and well-being for children and young people wanted to be a priority, so we'll absolutely be looking to have you back to look in some of these issues in more detail, and I hope we can all agree that's a fairly open invitation. Kate, you were next.
I don't know what to ask you. I have so many things that I want to raise from it.
We're meeting on Friday, though.
Yeah. So we'll go into more detail about that. I want to start by saying thank you so much for what you said about relationship and sexuality education, and how unequivocal you were about how opt-out and consistency, opt-out must be rejected and how consistency is key. I completely agree. I'm passionate about RSE and childcare, but because it hasn't been touched on in questions, the impact of academic selection and the impact it's having on children, young people, and what engagement you've been having with the department around it, and what more we can be doing.
My engagement around this issue has mainly been with the Independent Review of Education. I was focusing on that as the mechanism, because I mean it's one of a number of things that do need to change. You know, and it's not all about transfer, but that is just something. And prior to this, I had no solution. I think the Independent Review does provide a solution of sorts, and I'm disappointed that we haven't heard more about the implementation of the Independent Review generally. The creation of that single educational system. I know there's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of urgent issues actually that need to be addressed. And when I hear about schools with leaks and ceilings, I mean that's just dreadful too, you know. But I think if we're to think of over the long term, we do need to bring the schools in line, and there does need to be mandatory things that happen in all our schools. Relationships is part of that, and relationships are so fundamental. You know, whether it's the relationships in early childhood or the relationships in the classroom, the relationships between the staff and the school community. Relationships are fundamental to well-being and mental health. They really, really are. So I think a broader focus on relationships might be the answer here. And, you know, the relationships education is what we're talking about. We shouldn't get pigeonholed into the sexuality stuff. In terms of the transfer, I don't know if there's a willingness to change, to be honest. And, you know, we've some research that we're going to be putting out.
It's not our research, because it's obviously a position that our office has been quite strong on. We wanted to look at the issue from an independent view, as in we didn't want anything to do with it that would say that it was biased or forced in one way. So we actually reached out to Stremulus, and they did a piece of research for us that focused on that non-transfer year. So during the COVID pandemic, when the transfer tests were cancelled last minute, like what impact that had, if it kind of extended on a piece of quantitative work they had done to see if it changed the cohorts within the schools with their social demographics and stuff. We will be having a launch of that report in the next couple of weeks, so we'll send it out to you, and I don't want to step in their toes because they will give you a great overview of what they found. But really it is just the complexity of our education system and how it creates disadvantage and perpetuates those kind of things through the transition process, whatever that process looks like. And obviously we need to look at that going forward and implement the independent review to make that a fairer process for our young people, so that they're not being, again, pigeonholed into certain schools or being told at 11, this is your capability, this is what you can do, rather than what are your aspirations, how is our education system going to support you to do that. So it's really just a refocus of how we value our young people within our education system and what we design it to do.
Interesting, thank you.
So Robbie, you're next. I'm conscious we don't want to keep our youth panel waiting too much longer. So I'll ask Robbie and then Cheryl following that to be as brief as possible. But obviously there's a lot here we are looking to follow up on. So.
Right, thank you guys. Thank you. Brilliant. Good to see you guys. Thank you for your presentation. And so I'll make a bit of a statement, very short statement, and you can either agree or disagree and speak to it or not, and then I'll ask you a question, Siobhan, if that's okay. So the first one relates back to our very earliest conversations, which would have been before you were even the mental health champion. So this is in and around Protect Life 2 strategy and stuff. When the terminology in and around a trauma-informed approach and ACEs were really banging and bouncing and we all understood it, I genuinely think whether it's the lack of government or whether it's that we're not using that terminology, the vocabulary that we had determined and made sense and people understood has kind of been set a little bit back, not by you, not by me, but by the entirety of the approach to transforming and informing a better approach to improving emotional health and well-being, particularly with young people. So that's just something you can speak to if you don't mind. And then the question really centres in and around a radio report that I listened to this week, which I absolutely fundamentally agree with, which pinpointed the point when the mental health crisis kind of exploded or exacerbated, and it was around social media. And it was around the introduction of social media, telephones, iPads being placed in the hands of young children, possibly even infants. The information that they're getting, the disinformation, the cyberbullying, and the propensity to receive information at an age inappropriate time. For me, it just makes sense. The correlation between the two cannot be pulled apart. If you can speak to it, whether you agree, is that because I know you'll have done a lot of research on that, and if that is the case, what would be your suggestion towards legislation that we could bring forward to deal with digital devices, online access, and all of those salient parts?
Okay, so I agree with you. I feel that mental health generally has fallen down the agenda, to be honest. There's just less emphasis on it. And other things have kind of, taken a higher priority. The trauma-informed approach is something I'm really, really keen to advance. What I want to do is see the cross-departmental working group that I reported to in the very first year when I was in post. I want to see that reinstated so that there's a direct kind of mechanism where I can discuss these issues. Because being trauma-informed is something for all of the government departments, and it's about recognising the importance of relational connections, of voice, choice, empowerment, transparency, openness, recognising cultural, historical issues that are affecting people's sense of psychological safety. So all of those things are part of trauma-informed approach. Also recognising the role of ACEs and early adversities and the body and brain's response to trauma, mental illness and all that, and what trauma is and what trauma isn't, the difference between trauma and stress. So all of that stuff we need all that resurrected, and I think through that group we might be able to do it. The Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland rolled out a lot of programmes and training programmes there. I'm looking over the water to Scotland at their National Trauma Training Programme and thinking we actually would need to have something similar here in terms of being trauma informed. And I'm also looking at some of the harms that the trauma informed, this idea of we're all trauma, the potential adverse implications of this as a way of dealing with it. So in the same way as the harms from mental health interventions in schools, we've always got to look at what are the unintended consequences of what we're doing. I think if we're truly trauma informed, it's about an attitude, a shift in a mindset towards true equality, true empowerment, making sure that we prioritise relationships and we recognise the role of past traumas. We don't need to say that we're trauma informed. In fact, if you're saying that, and it's not a tick box thing either, and it's not one training programme, it's a whole mindset shift. So I would like to see more of that, and even a national training programme if we could, if that were possible. In terms, do you want to speak on that?
No, the social media one is the next one.
Yeah, the social media one it's an interesting one. I mean, so the evidence is really telling us that it's not the social media or the devices themselves that are the problem. It's how young people connect online and what it is replacing, what they're not doing when they're in social media. And one of the earliest set of guidance was from the Royal College of Psychiatrists, who said that if it's getting in the way of young people's sleep, if they're not engaging in face-to-face contact, if they don't have those relational contacts and friendship groups, and all their time is spent on social media or online, then that is going to be harmful. If they're not getting their physical activity and they're spending time online instead, again, that's going to be harmful. It comes back to the kind of the 4 pillars of mental health: sleep, physical activity, social connection, all of the things that we need to do to keep ourselves healthy. So if it's replacing those aspects of their lives, then it can become a problem. Young people use online and social media. They go online to connect with people who are like them as well, and it can be a way of having them get support for mental health difficulties and preventing mental health difficulties from emerging and getting tips, but there's a lot of harmful content out there. So I think in terms of what we can do about this, the online harms bill that Samaritans are bringing forward, that's really important that we reduce the level of online content that's harmful if we can. But the most important thing we can do is teach young people about how to navigate this in a safe way. And unfortunately, that comes back to the RSE again, because a lot of this is about what we can teach them and the skills that we can give them to manage the online world very, very safely. But certainly even the light that's emitted from devices late at night is not good for young people. So do you have anything else to say there, Nicole?
Just in regards to our, we did a series of engagement events across Northern Ireland with young people. Focused on what causes the most stress in certain environments or whatever, and the online environment was a massive one. So again, it's kind of, there's two ways to look at it. So all devices aren't bad. There's putting a tablet in front of a child isn't necessarily bad if they're learning like a cognitive skill, if they're things that are designed for children of that age to increase their cognition. Flip side of that is, when they're going into the social media world, they're constantly attached to friends. So where we would have had maybe one or two friends commenting on how we look, they have thousands, potentially people that they don't know. And through the engagement reports, through the engagement sessions, it came out very clearly that the online safety talks that they got in school came too late and did not broach on the level of contact that they actually have with the online world. They mentioned apps that they don't use anymore because they've got new ones. They mentioned how to put parental controls on things that they already have workarounds for. Like, we're behind because it is a generational difference. So we need to catch up on their level of understanding of that world to fully protect them, because at the minute it's not. The protections aren't there to cut them off from that. If there is things like cyberbullying, if there is things where they're becoming socially isolated because they're just getting that online engagement.
Because I know we're going to be tight for time. It's an observation.
We like to talk about listening to young people. We need to do some of it this afternoon.
I think there's an acceptance of someone in my generation that we are moving into a digital world. But if we're moving into a digital world, it'll kick against everything that we would ever teach anybody in regards to relationship and what's inherent in people to spend time in person, be face to face, because there's nothing will replace that. No digital creation will ever. And I think there's genuinely a bit more of a danger. We need to become a wee bit more aware of it, because it becomes a replacement for. So we look at hybrid working, for instance. So it's not just kids; it's adults who are now hybrid working, which is great for a time. But I think as a society, we will be facing into unintended consequences, which will be an increase in the fabric sort of splitting apart, and then the reliance on each other for support, which will feed into higher levels of poor mental health, I think.
And just to say, as a parent, you need to be there at your...
Probably draw a line on that one. That's fine.
Just a point of note on that, Chair, that if, in terms of questioning in the future, if we don't mind, if we go that way, then we reverse it, because when we get to this end, it's always getting cut at the end. So
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robbie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much. That is really, really informative. Robbie did steal my question, but it was just to highlight on that, young people now are constantly connected and they're addicted to their phone as well. And I know as a mum to a child who's 12, I see what children are seeing and what their social media is horrific, to be quite honest, and they just can't get away from it. And I just read within the report, obviously, about the school non-attendance and children not feeling safe within the school because they're going into the school, they're coming home, they still can't escape that type of bullying and the feelings that they're that's happening to them. So is there anything that you would recommend, or any support or compassionate measures that could be introduced within that school setting that could help children feel more comfortable in that environment?
Well, one of the things, so I suppose I would not recommend that we ban phones from school, but I do think there needs to be policies around the use of phones in school that need to be implemented. So that's one thing. I think some young people need their phone to feel safe. I mean, as adults, a lot of us can identify with that. So, I think as a security and safety measure, the phone needs to be there. But I do think we need to have open discussions, and we need to talk to young people about what would work for them in terms of using phones in schools and all of that. I think the legislation around very triggering images on social media, are, particularly images of self-harm and suicide, and images that would promote disordered eating, for example. Images are very triggered in terms of compulsive behaviours. So we really need, if we can do anything, it's around that image-based social media, because that, I think, is the strongest impact on young people's mental health, and giving them the skills to manage the relational stuff around the likes and the messages that they receive and the comments that they receive, and that can be done through a good relationships education. But yeah, we need to listen to young people, because even like I'm a step removed, I don't know really what's going on, and as parents we need to be over the shoulder of the young person, really with them, and understanding and having that relationship with them, so that they can tell us when things are going wrong and show us what they're looking at online, so we have an awareness then too.
Particularly around self-harm, it's something that now is probably prevalent in the internet, and it's horrendous to see that children are experiencing that, or sometimes encouraged, and it's just something I think that should be a priority too to address. But
very unsafe content generally around suicide, graphic imagery, sensationalist coverage, all of that stuff that contributes to suicidal thinking and can influence how people behave when they're in crisis. So we need to be using digital generally to promote well-being and mental health. We need to be using that mechanism too, but it's only by listening to young people that we'll be able to do that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor O'Neill and Nicole, for your time today. That has been really, really helpful session, and I think there's an awful lot that we are going to be picking up in future weeks. I would like to propose one action. The emotional health and wellbeing framework was referenced a number of times. I think in forward work planning, I think we should be factoring that in to hear from the department on that and on how that's being progressed. So,
essential, yeah.
If members are agreed on that. Great.
Great.
That is brilliant. Thank you very much.
Feel free to contact us, for any of you separately if there's anything there you want to discuss. Thank you.
So I'll just hand over to the clerk for any actions arising from that, and then we'll take a short comfort break, and we'll get to our youth panel.
So the main thing that I picked up was that the champion would like to reinstate the cross-departmental group that she used to report to kind of disseminate, and particularly in terms of a glossary of terms and the use of terminology regarding trauma-informed behaviour, and then to ask for a briefing on the emotional health and wellbeing strategy. Sounds like a good idea as well. Does anybody have anything else?
Sorry, is that something that we can write to support? Is that the action off the back that working group be set up?
Yeah. To see does the department intend to re-establish that group and to say why.
So it's a 5-minute comfort break and restart at past. If we could just move into closed session while we do that.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
It's great to have so many young people here attending. I'm just going to refer members to a briefing paper from the committee clerk at page 86. This is all with item 7. And there are briefing papers from all the groups represented here today, which hopefully you've all seen in your packs, and they run from page 86 to page 129. So not everybody's going to be able to present. I think there's been an arrangement made, just one representative from each group in terms of the initial presentations. So if I could invite up Emer Crozier from the Northern Ireland Housing Executive Youth Forum, Ellen Taylor from the Secondary Students' Union for Northern Ireland, Mia Murray from the Northern Ireland Assembly Youth Assembly, and Inalua Olasokeban, I hope I pronounced that correctly, and Alex Dean. Inagula is from Diverse Youth NI, and then Alex Dean from the Nikki Youth Panel. So you're all very welcome. And thank you for being patient with our timings today. We're not setting a great example as a committee in terms of timekeeping, but there were big agenda items today. But we are really delighted to have you all here today. So the way we're hoping to work this today is for each of you in turn to give a short presentation, and we're suggesting 3 minutes each, and then we'll move to questions from members. If I could ask members to maybe direct their question to the organisation on the back of their presentation that they want to answer, and I think I'd also want to be really clear at this stage. We've entitled this item Introduction to Youth Engagement. So this is really about helping us understand the issues that are important to you and helping us understand how we can best engage with you in the future. So we want to prioritise youth engagement very much as a committee. We'd be really keen to actually have a specific youth engagement sort of stakeholder event. So don't feel you've got to get all your issues crammed into today, but we really do want to hear as much as we can from you, and that will hopefully set the agenda for our engagement down the line. So if I could maybe just take presentations in the order they're appearing in my list. So I'm going to ask Emer to make a start. All right.
Thank you. So I'm here on behalf of the Northern Ireland Youth Forum. I'm a member of the Executive Committee and also the Elephant Coming Out of the Dark Mental Health Steering Group. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Chair and the members of the committee for the invite today. I'm going to share with you our insight into mental health and wellbeing and its place in our education curriculum. So back in August 2023, both the Northern Ireland Youth Forum and the Secondary Students' Union worked together in partnership to explore the needs of young people as to whether or not they needed and wanted mental health and wellbeing implemented into our compulsory curriculum. So this is a project that both myself and Ellen have worked on. Our youth steering group produced a survey to capture the views and opinions of young people on the topic of mental health in education. This survey, along with further research carried out by the Students' Union, showed an overwhelming need and want for mental health and wellbeing as a compulsory subject. In fact, 93% of our respondents felt the need to introduce mental health and wellbeing as a core subject. As a group of young people, we are aware change is not possible overnight and it will not be straightforward, but what we do understand is the importance of education and early intervention. We want mental health to be given the same level of priority as physical education in schools. The survey allowed young people to have their say as to what is already in place from the department and the Education Authority. We found that a majority of young people have never heard of the services being provided by the department in schools. We're also happy to send out our survey findings to the committee following this meeting if you are interested. Our key asks and recommendations have been created to provide a pathway on how to deliver this. We feel this is not just an education department issue and requires cross-departmental working. Over the years, we have seen the introduction of programmes aimed at improving mental health and well-being of students from primary and secondary education. Unfortunately, none of these have been sustainable due to funding cuts. With the implementation of health and well-being as a core curriculum subject, this would do away with short-term programmes in selected schools and areas to provide an education for all students. Our asks are not about increasing the workload on our current teaching staff. They are not about minimising the support provided by current providers in statutory, community and voluntary sectors. They are not a sticking plaster solution, and they are also not about changing the role of our education providers. Our first ask is to establish a youth-led and adult-supported cross-departmental working group, including relevant bodies such as SEA and the Department of Education, to work towards a co-creation of a curriculum for mental health and wellbeing by 2025. The Children's Services Cooperation Act requires cooperation among children's authorities in Northern Ireland to contribute to the well-being of children and young people. We feel there is a requirement for health and education to work together on this matter and to involve young people from the onset. Our second ask is that by 2028 to complete a co-created curriculum on mental health and well-being for primary, post-primary and special educational needs schools. This process has to involve young people from the beginning to ensure their needs are being met. Our third ask is that by 2029 to introduce mental health and wellbeing teaching qualification by working with initial teacher education providers such as St Mary's College Belfast, Stranmillis University College, Queen's University Belfast and Ulster University. This is approved by the Department of Education and accredited by the General Teaching Council for Northern Ireland. Through a PGCE pathway for teaching wellbeing as a subject, we want to see a qualified, competent teaching workforce who are comfortable in teaching the subject. Our fourth ask is that by 2029 to develop and implement a module within all teaching qualifications to provide a baseline knowledge for future education providers regarding mental health and wellbeing. By 2029, develop and implement an upskilling programme for all qualified and active education providers, which will provide a baseline knowledge on mental health and wellbeing. This is to ensure that all our teaching workforce have a baseline knowledge of mental health and wellbeing of pupils. Our final ask is that by 2033, a fully implemented mental health curriculum across all educational settings with the usual moderation requirements to ensure proper levels of education provided. Just like PE, we want compulsory teaching with a minimum set of teaching hours. We cannot improve our mental health and wellbeing by our physical health alone. Our asks are taken from the views of children and young people across Northern Ireland from mental health and emotional wellbeing organisations. They complement the ongoing work of the statutory, community and voluntary sectors, and they are a long-term solution to improving the emotional wellbeing of children and young people. To conclude our time, I'm going to try and wrap this up.
Okay.
If implemented, we feel that this will not only impact students' emotional well-being, but also educational attainment. This will increase attendance, which ultimately will produce better outcomes for students. We continue to gain support from other voluntary and community organisations who are burdened with the demand for services whilst being underfunded. We are building support with others, including the Children's Commissioner, to help us to achieve our overarching aim. We ask you to listen to the voices of young people and to help us turn our actions into outcomes. Thank you for the time to speak.
Emer, and you're doing well on time. So next on my list, I'll take the presentations first and then we'll move to questions. So next on my list is Ellen.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ellen Taylor and I am President of the Secondary Students' Union of Northern Ireland, otherwise known as SUNY or SSUNI. Thank you so much to the Chair, Vice Chair and the Committee for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the over 50,000 members of SUNY that I am representing here today. To begin, I will give a brief overview of what SUNY is. We are in our fourth year, having been founded in August of 2020 in response to the lack of consultation with students during COVID. We aim to represent secondary students across Northern Ireland and advocate for the issues that matter to young people, from mental health, like Emer said, to building a curriculum that prepares our students for life beyond school. In our view, exams place too much stress on children, with more time being spent on exam technique than learning, and A-levels limiting 16-year-olds to choose only 3 or 4 subjects. Our research found that school councils do not reflect the voice of young people and aren't even instituted in a significant number of schools. Uniforms are not practical, they're expensive and restrictive for students with special educational needs, and many schools still do not provide the option for girls to wear trousers instead of a skirt. Mental health continues to be the most raised issue we receive. Students do not feel supported by their schools and counselling is all too often inadequate. And whilst there are fantastic examples of effective shared education, such as Politics in Action, we do not think that in a large number of cases, shared education has contributed to better community relations, and we would point to instances of young people participating in shared education events, but never actually speaking to a pupil from the other school at that event. We also uncovered the sexism and sexual harassment that plagues our schools, but largely goes unnoticed. Our survey revealed that 71% of pupils do not think sexism at school is taken seriously. They don't want to report incidents of sexism and sexual harassment, And of the 36% of respondents who have experienced sexual assault, and the 56.5% who have experienced sexual harassment, only 7.5% reported it to a teacher. Our most recent report, as Cara Hunter has already raised, was entitled Let Us Learn, and looked in depth at LLW, which simply isn't taught really much at all in schools. 77% of young people hadn't even heard of the term RSE. 69% of respondents felt that LLW hadn't prepared them for the world of work. 64% of young people haven't received rights education. And 86.5% of young people feel that LLW has not provided them with useful political education. Our young people are neither educated together nor taught about the Troubles, as it is only taught at GCSE, and around a quarter of schools don't even teach that module. Modern languages is another area of focus for us, as we feel they are not taught effectively in schools, which is also in part due to the harshly marked exams, yet with a huge amount of content to cover at GCSE and A-level. And we've also run free and accessible revision sessions in collaboration with Queen's PGCE Centre to fill the gap left by Action Short of Strike. We've worked with Marie Curie on bereavement education, partnered with NIYF on mental health education, campaigned for COVID adjustments, CAO reform and more. Our solutions to many of these issues are available on our website, in our reports and resources. But as you will all know, funding is arguably the biggest issue facing education and ensuring the future of our society. The £30,000 starting salary for teachers is welcome progress, but schools are still struggling to recruit the best and brightest teachers, particularly within STEM, and children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds continually do not receive the same access to the arts and music as children from higher socioeconomic backgrounds do. And as a last note regarding special educational needs, the role of classroom assistants needs to be looked at. At the moment, they are poorly paid and have no routes of progression. It is like a one-size-fits-all approach, regardless of need. A child with dyslexia will be assigned a classroom assistant, just as a child with autism or ADHD would, instead of specialised support. I'm happy to be questioned about any issues pertaining to secondary students, and I would like to thank the committee again for the opportunity to speak today, and I hope that this is the first of many engagements with the committee.
Thank you, Ellen. And that moves on to Maya, or Mia. Is it Mia or Maya?
Mia.
Mia.
Thank you, sir.
Apologies.
Thank you to the committee for the opportunity to say a few words about the Youth Assembly and to talk about some of the issues that young people in Northern Ireland are facing. First, I may give you a brief background on the Youth Assembly. So the Northern Ireland Youth Assembly recruited its second cohort of 90 members aged between 12 and 16 in October 2023. We're a diverse group of young people from every constituency and representing Section 75 groups such as gender, race, religious identity, background, care experience, disability, sexuality, etc. The Youth Assembly has three main roles. 1. To engage with the work of the Northern Ireland Assembly on legislation and inquiries relevant to young people. 2. To undertake project work generated by the Youth Assembly committees. And 3. To engage with wider consultation with government departments and in Youth Voice projects. In January 2024, we conducted our Big Youth Survey. Young people from across Northern Ireland completed the survey and shared the issues they wanted their Youth Assembly to focus on. Our second plenary, which was attended by Robbie Butler in February and was also chaired by the Speaker, gave us an opportunity to debate these issues from the survey and vote on our top three priorities. Based on these priorities, the Youth Assembly committees have now been established. They are education, health, and rights and equality. I'll now move on to talk about some of the findings of the Big Youth Survey. Youth Assembly members created a list of 18 issues which were voted on in the survey, and young people could add their own issues to that list. Almost 1,800 young people aged between 12 to 21 completed the survey. Committee members should have a summary report in their packs, and I would advise you taking a stern look over it. As you will see, education was the second highest issue raised. The number of comments for education were substantially higher than any other topic. Many of these issues have been referenced by the Minister today, demonstrating a stern need for improvement. Unfortunately, I do not have time to cite them all here. However, I will attempt to give you all a brief summary. The issue which received the most comments was curriculum. Many young people felt that the curriculum is outdated and not fit for the 21st century. As the Minister is currently working with SIA on this matter, we must ask, will this committee hold him accountable for having youth have an input on his decisions? They are concerned about the poor quality of careers education and the lack of opportunities to learn skills which will prepare them for adult life. Violence against women and girls was also mentioned this morning. We believe that we should be consulted on that matter. Some felt that there should be more emphasis on raising environmental awareness. The Youth Assembly are currently working with SIA on this matter. Many young people spoke of the stress of constant testing and the pressure of homework. They said that school itself can often be a source of poor mental health, and many schools do very little to support their students. Due to the timing of the survey in January 2024, many comments referred to the strikes undertaken by teachers and support staff, which has resulted in extremely important days of missed learning and has had a detrimental impact on young people and their families. The lack of teachers and the lack of teaching support staff was referenced this morning. This was referenced in our report also. There was also a shortage of subs, which has had a detrimental impact on GCSE A-level students and students in post-primary and primary education. Young people told us of the poor conditions of some of their schools and the lack of modern resources which they can avail of. Again, this was referenced this morning in the school maintenance backlog and the school improvement programme, which we hope the committee will consult us on. Many young people stated the issue to a right of free education. They stated that school uniform costs are simply out of control. We plan to talk to the Minister about this and his upcoming consultation on the matter. Many young people have asked for free school meals to be available to all students, given the current cost of living crises affecting many families. Again, referenced this morning was the holiday hunger payments during the summer and term holidays, which we believe should be crucial and should be a key priority for the committee and the Minister. You recently met with the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People. Nikki, who have a representative here today, produced their third monitoring report on March 4th of this year into the review of special educational needs and disability provisions in mainstream schools. Nikki reports that the recent strain on the system, which has been worsened by educational funding crises, leading to cuts in both the SEND transformation budget and broader funding, which is also echoed in our survey. As you said last September, 1,000 children need SEND school places, and we hope that this will not be repeated in September. We, as the Youth Assembly, have loads of children who do avail of these services, and we hope that the committee will consult them and us on this matter. Members of the first cohort of the Youth Assembly gave evidence to the Independent Review of Education panel in April 2022 and attended the report launch in December 2023. Finally, a strong message came out of the survey about the voice of young people being heard and given due weight in all that matters to them. It is for the Minister and for the Department to take forward the recommendations of the report. The Youth Assembly asks that all MLAs ensure the voices of young people are heard when recommendations are being considered. I would just like to conclude by saying that the recent resumption of full Assembly business, the Youth Assembly members are looking forward to engaging directly with Assembly committees, MLAs and Ministers on these issues as our work programme develops. We're just down the hall and Lucy and Pearson Clare will be happy to reference you on to us. I will be happy to take any questions you have and don't hold back. Thank you.
Thank you. And then our next presentation is from Iniolua from Diverse Youth NI.
Good day everyone, my name is Iniolua Shibiko and I'm a proud member of Diverse Youth NI. Firstly, I would like to express my gratitude to the committee for extending this invitation to us to speak on the pressing issues surrounding educational policy and children's services. More specifically, the matter of empowering and enhancing education and employment for BAME, asylum seeker and refugee youth and children in marginalised communities of Northern Ireland. In the heart of Northern Ireland's vibrant communities lies a group of resilient individuals, often overlooked in the landscape of opportunity, the marginalised youth. Within this demographic, asylum seekers, refugees, and those from BME, that is Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds, silently contend with a significant challenge: the uphill battle to access quality education and secure meaningful employment. Diverse Youth and I is an organization that stands at the forefront of this challenge, dedicated to fostering educational growth for this underprivileged youth. We collaborate with civic institutions like Ulster University and Queen's University to provide ICT and digital literacy courses. We also offer comprehensive coding training and academic enrichment programs for young students in their final class. These courses are designed to equip the youth with necessary skills to navigate the digital world, a crucial aspect in today's technology-driven society. We all know that education serves as a fundamental pillar in a child's development, acting as a primary vehicle for empowerment. However, what are the implications when the most vulnerable members of our society are denied this basic right? Asylum-seeking, refugee and migrant children in Northern Ireland encounter significant obstacles in their education as outlined by the National Children's Bureau. These challenges include language barriers, trauma, racism, bullying, and social isolation, hindering their access to quality education and integration into the system. As a representative within this community, I clearly understand the harsh realities of these challenges. Upon arrival in Northern Ireland following my 17th birthday, my initial excitement began to fade into hopelessness. Over 100 sent emails often resulted in rejection or were simply ignored. Each "I am so sorry" or "unfortunately we do not have a place for you" echoed the reality of my situation. I wondered if I would ever get the opportunity to go to school. This shouldn't be the case. Other young people who were fortunate enough to arrive in Northern Ireland under the age of 16 might get an opportunity if they have the qualifications to their name and understand basic English. Otherwise, we're all in the same boat, desperately craving the opportunity to gain education, but often met with a wall of disappointment. The challenges extend beyond rejection letters and bureaucratic hurdles. Older teenagers like me who arrive in Northern Ireland as immigrants often receive no education or help with language learning beyond the age of 16. Unlike other parts of the UK, there is no statutory duty to educate children beyond 16 years of age in Northern Ireland. This contrasts with regions that have education programs for immigrants when compulsory education ends. While ESOL, that is English for speakers of other languages, classes are available, lengthy waiting lists mean some young people wait more than a year to access these vital resources. Disparities also affect BME students, with the Equality Education for Northern Ireland noting a gap in further education entry based on ethnicity. Additionally, Queen's University report underlines the struggles of minority ethnic groups in navigating the educational system, exacerbated by schools denying admissions to newcomers despite available places. Furthermore, the cost of university education often presents a significant barrier for asylum seekers in Northern Ireland, as they are required to pay the same fees as international or overseas students, which is substantially higher than for UK students. This stands in contrast to Scotland, that has extended free tuition fees to migrant students. Despite efforts from organizations like Diverse Youth and I, many still cannot afford these fees due to their inability to work. This underscores the need for systemic changes to ensure education accessibility for all. Now, how can we change this? 1. By advocating for legislative amendments to establish a statutory duty to provide education beyond the age of 16, preferably the age of 18, for all children, including immigrants and asylum seekers, in line with other parts of UK. 2. Create specific pathways for older immigrants, including refugee and asylum-seeking teenagers, to access further education and vocational training, including allocating additional resources to expand ESOL programs and reduce waiting times for enrollment. 3. Review the fee structure for asylum seekers in higher education to ensure affordability and equitable access, considering options such as extending free tuition fees or providing scholarships specifically for this demographic. 4. Allocate resources for specialized language support programs in schools catering to asylum-seeking, refugee, and BME children. 5. Integrate trauma-informed education practices into school curricular and teacher training programs to better support children who have experienced diversity. Implement mandatory cultural competence and anti-racism training for all education professionals to create a more inclusive and welcoming school environment. 7. Establish protocols for addressing instances of racial bullying or discrimination in schools, including clear reports and disciplinary measures. 8. Develop standardized enrollment procedures for fair admission, regardless of immigration status or ethnicity. 9. Improve communication between schools, local authorities, and refugee support organizations to ease transitions and access to educational services for newly arrived children. 10. Foster partnerships between schools, community organizations, and government agencies for comprehensive support services, including mental health support, family engagement, and mentorship programs for asylum-seeking, refugee, and BME children. Implementing these recommendations has the potential to significantly improve educational outcomes for marginalized communities of Northern Ireland. In conclusion, asylum-seeking and BME children in Northern Ireland face complex educational challenges, including systemic barriers, language barriers, financial constraints, and discrimination within the education system. Current policies and children's services often fail to adequately address these issues, resulting in disparities in educational outcomes and limiting the potential of marginalized youth. The recommendations provided offer concrete steps towards creating a more equitable and supportive education environment. Urgent action is needed to empower these young people to access equal education and quality education and all opportunities for growth. Collaboration with organizations like Diversity and and engagement with stakeholders across all sectors are crucial for driving forward these necessary reforms. Together, we can create a future where every young person, regardless of their background or immigration status, can thrive and succeed in Northern Ireland's educational landscape. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that leaves Alex from the Nicky Youth Panel for our last presentation.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair and members. Thank you for my invitation to attend today's meeting and thank you for hearing my voice. My name is Alex Dean and I am 16 years old, a member of the Nicky Youth Panel and a student at Newbridge Integrated College in Loughbrickland. I want to be a voice for other children who do not have one so that I can voice issues that concern them and protect their rights. There are so many things impacting negatively on young people within our education system, but today I want to touch upon a few things that are really important to me. These are sin, bullying, mental health, and attendance at school and RSE. To start, I'd like to emphasise the importance of the UNCRC, especially Articles 28 and 29, which focus on the right to education and that education should develop each child's personality, talents and abilities to their fullest potential. Also, the recent UN Committee's concluding observations should be implemented in full to support our executive to do this. The UNCRC should be incorporated fully into local legislation. Firstly, special educational needs. In primary school, I always struggled with writing, getting work finished, PE, making friends, and many more things. I would take 2 hours a night to finish my homework. I would never get work finished and had to stay in at break time to finish my work. While I was on question 2, my peers were on question 8. I felt stupid and different to everyone else. My mum kept saying something was wrong every year, but my teachers would dismiss her. I ended up having to drop out of the transfer test after getting terrible scores, not because I couldn't understand, but because I could not finish the test. At this point in my life, I started to have suicidal thoughts. Then when I went to secondary school, I was taken seriously and went from feeling stupid to feeling smart. At 12, I was diagnosed with dyspraxia and some hypermobile joints, and at 15, I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Still, after getting these diagnoses, I am still fighting to get the support I need. That cannot be facilitated because there's not enough money. I have spoken to people and parents who have gone through the same things I have, who have no school to go to because unit and special school places were cut and there is nowhere that can facilitate them. Secondly, addressing bullying in schools. I understand what it's like to be bullied, name-calling, hitting and beratement, which eventually ends up giving you a low self-esteem and not wanting to come into school for fear of being hurt. all because you are different or do not fit in. Bullying has been identified as a persistent issue affecting pupils in Northern Ireland, in particular for certain equality groups, including trans students, pupils with minority ethnic students, students with special educational needs or a disability, and students with same-sex attraction. This can happen in person and online. Recently, I have witnessed a version of bullying where horrible, nasty things are written about people on the bathroom walls in school. There should be robust monitoring of the implementation of anti-bullying policies in schools, and incidents of bullying should be recorded by the Department of Education. Next, emotional health and well-being in schools. So many young people in Northern Ireland are struggling with their emotional health and well-being, whether that is due to bullying, isolation, family issues, pressure from social media, especially after the COVID pandemic. I think social media is one of the forefronts of bad emotional health and well-being in children and young people. Children and young people feel the pressure from social media to be perfect and always having to present in a perfect way, when in reality these things we see on social media give us a tainted view. Many young people fail to cope with other pressures such as exams and financial stress. Our education system assesses young people on 5 GCSEs. Should it not also assess young people on their self-esteem and emotional health and well-being? There is not enough support or services in schools to facilitate the number of students struggling with their emotional health and well-being. School attendance. From witnessing attendance in my own school, it is extremely low, with my year group, which is a GCSE year, having the lowest attendance in school. The Department of Education has informed Nikki that 44,000 pupils are reported as having persistent absence, an increase of 123% since 2017 and 18 and 2021/2022. From the COVID pandemic, I have witnessed the attendance rate in school decline rather than increase as it should. This is down to a range of factors such as anxiety, unmet SEND needs, bullying and shifting attitudes post-COVID. And finally, RSE. RSE needs to be taught consistently in primary and secondary schools in Northern Ireland at an age-appropriate level with no religious or cultural influence, so that children and young people can understand and maintain healthy relationships, and so young people can get their information from a factually reliable source. The Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and the UNCRC concluding observations have both made recommendations to deliver age-appropriate, comprehensive and scientifically accurate education on sexual and reproductive health to young people. Currently, RSE is taught with the religious and cultural ethos of each school. Children and young people are not accessing certain information due to this and are having to look elsewhere where information may not be entirely factual. A recent Education Training Inspectorate evaluation received almost 15,000 pupil responses and highlighted their frustration at not being consulted sufficiently on the content, relevance and delivery of RSE. Compare that to the Department of Education's consultation on the new RSE legislation last September, where only 0.86% responses were from pupils. There was also no young person's version made available. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you. They were all excellent presentations, and I don't know where we're going to begin with our questions or know where to direct them to. I'm going to just break with normal format and see if Cara does want to come in, because I know you need to get away and I know you'd be keen to ask a question, so I'm happy to bring you in.
I really appreciate it, and the Chair has been very good because he's had such an emphasis on this committee, and all of us agree that we really want to have young people at the forefront of all we do, and hearing directly from yourselves. It's just been fantastic. You're all very inspiring young people. I know when I was your age I could not have done what you have done today, so thank you. I have questions for you all, but I can only choose one, so I'm going to do it with Alex. Alex, you touched on the important issue there of bullying, and it's something you spoke so eloquently about. And I would just love to know, what do you think of the current bullying policies? What do you think works, and what do you recommend, what changes should be made, or what do you think should be brought forward to support young people who've experienced bullying?
I think for a start, to help combat the issue of bullying, that we should first have a part to the curriculum to address diversity, because I think that's a big issue that a lot of people don't understand the diversity of different young people, and I think that's one of the biggest issues that needs to be touched on, is that people really need educated about the different diversities that there is in young people.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, and thank you, Chair, for giving me this speech. I'm afraid I have to go now, but thank you all. You did an exceptional, good job today. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Cara. So I'll come in with a question. I'm going to ask in a Lua question. You've got, as Diverse Youth NI, there a really comprehensive set of proposals that you think would make a real difference in terms of education for children from black and ethnic minority communities. What level of engagement have you had with the department on those, and have you had the opportunity to share those recommendations with the Department of Education, and had any response?
Nothing previously. This is our first meeting with the Committee of Education or any governmental body in terms of these issues. I know that I really do want to highlight the fact that a lot of teens and people who fall under the asylum seeker, refugee and minority ethnic background, they do not have enough educational support coming into Northern Ireland, especially for those people who do not have previous understanding of or education of English. You know, they're usually subjected to a lot of harsh factors, and there isn't enough support for those people. And speaking for my own personal story, when I came to Northern Ireland a few months ago, it was very difficult in terms of accessing education. I still haven't accessed education, by the way. So it is a lot of issues that are compounding these issues that they're facing. So we need to address them in order to build a more equitable society in terms of education. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and I know time is short, but I would just want to make a proposal as a start, because I'm conscious this is your first opportunity to engage maybe in this sort of forum. Yes. If you have those proposals that in a format you can share with us, I mean, I would like to seek the committee's agreement that we share those with the department and ask for their response to each of those proposals you've set forward. I think that would be a really important first start if we have agreement from the committee in relation to that.
Yeah, agreed.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Danny, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I was brilliant, and it fills me with so much hope, because every one of your presentations had equality and respect at the heart of everything you're saying and you want to do. So I have no doubt we'll probably see you on this other side of this in a number of years, or maybe even setting policy, because you're absolutely brilliant, and I mean that there, because everything that we're trying to do and say, you nailed it, like really nailed it. And I suppose I want to open this up sort of for all of you, and he's going to jump in and ask it, because you're all sort of the same theme I'm going with. You're articulating what you're saying, you're hitting the key issues, but is your voice really being heard? And I'm just going to tease this out, is, do you feel, because I volunteer in a youth club, and they'll say this to me all the time, they feel like their voices would be more maybe respected if they could vote. So I'm talking about dropping it down to maybe even 16, and what your view with that would be, and then just touching on the curriculum and maybe even the homework side of it, because I hear that a lot as well. We shouldn't have homework. Youth workers will say this as well, and so do some of the teachers that I engage with, that reducing homework or the curriculum. What is that view that's coming from our young people as well around homework and then school uniforms? In the research I was doing on the motion that we spoke on, it was something that jumped out at me, and it surprised me, and it's a bugbear of Pat's as well, as around actual school uniforms themselves. The percentage of parents and grandparents saying, it was like, I think it was over 90% want to keep uniforms. I'd like to hear your views on uniforms. Like, do you want to keep uniforms or get rid of? So,
do you want to take?
Yeah, I don't mind. So just the point in uniforms, since that's the one in my mind. We actually conducted research on uniform, the Secondary Students' Union, in collaboration with the Parent Engagement Group in 2021, and that found that uniforms were totally extortionate, and I think everyone knows that, but it was just backing that up. And with young people's views too, the kind of stories that came out, young people were embarrassed, and it's meant to be seen as a social leveller to wear a uniform, but that's not what it is at the minute, because you can, like, if you're wearing a second-hand blazer, for example, children pick up on that, and children pick up on the different types of uniform and that sort of thing as well, and they're all extortionate. So just on the point in uniform, in terms of GCSEs and curriculum, I think with homework, I think the curriculum at the minute is totally overloaded. Like, I think I touched on modern languages as an example. Like, teachers cannot physically teach everything in the year in the hours that they have, because the curriculum has just got so much piled onto it, and a lot of time in schools is spent on exam technique rather than the actual learning. It's like, how do you answer this question the way CA wants you to? It's very like formulaic, especially in exam subjects, which I think is an issue. And sorry, what was the first point you raised?
It was just, I think probably the section of it as well, just saying about coming home and being bombarded with homework as part of it. Did that come up in the survey being said? It's just the younger, probably our junior age group coming into that there.
I'm third year, and I wanted to reference that because we had an awful lot of members bring that up at our last plenary meeting, how, you know, the amount of exams going into first year kind of is like a huge jump, you know. Then at GCSE again, it's a huge jump, but I want to reference that stage in first year where your homework just skyrockets, and so does exams, especially in grammar schools. You know, they automatically expect you to conform to a standard that isn't exactly reasonable for somebody who has just come from such a relaxed environment in a primary school. And homework was, as well, as I said, heavily mentioned by our members, and I just wanted to apologise, Mr. Baker, because I remembered you were actually at our second plenary.
He didn't have a tie on then either, that's why you didn't remember.
Mr. Baker.
You're making him sound like Doctor Who.
Sorry. Yeah, so it was referenced quite heavily, and it's definitely something that either needs to be taken into going from P7 to first year, some support for students going through that huge developmental stage, and also having that skyrocketing workload, and as well going from that third to fourth year stage, which I'm glad I haven't experienced yet, but I'm most certainly not looking forward to. Just that support for students. But in regards to homework itself, I think it's actually a good way to bring school into home and make sure to hone in all those things taught in the school day, but definitely keeping it to a reasonable expectation. Not that schools should be expecting students to complete, you know, in my school, I know the guideline is, I think, 16 hours at A level per week, and 2 hours at GCSE per night, and then 1 hour in junior per night, which is simply unacceptable. It really should be a maximum half an hour.
And that's why I suppose it feeds into what I was saying around that there. If the voting age was dropped down to 16, would your voices be heard more? Because mental health, when I talk to any young people, and you've all related as well, it's the number one priority. And I remember back when I was at Belfast City Council, elephant in their room, and I don't know how much of the recommendations then is then taken on, and that's what I mean. If you were voting, would policy change quicker?
Yeah, sorry. I definitely think that the voting age being moved down to 16 would be a positive thing. That's something that I am very passionate about. I think in that case then young people's voices would be respected, but not even just so much respected that it wouldn't be optional to listen to us. I find that a lot of times when organisations or governments in a way pretend to listen to young people by bringing us in and listening to us, and nothing actually comes out of that. So I think it was Alex that had mentioned some of the recommendations from the UNCRC committee, and I actually went in the beginning of last year to the UN in Geneva, and we presented issues that young people were facing. But when we started that process, we actually looked back at recommendations that had been made, I think it was 5 years pre-COVID, and it was all the same issues that were being brought up, which was sort of demotivating in a way for us, because we were like, we've come all this way and we're talking about the same issues that were talked about 5 years beforehand, and nothing's come on from that. I do believe that young people have the capacity to vote. I think that is demonstrated by the young people that are in the room today, but I also think that that could be further enhanced by more political education in our education system. For me as a young person, I'm passionate about politics, but I had the first political education that I got was in GCSE history, and that was because I chose to do that subject. Students who don't choose GCSE history don't have that experience or that knowledge, and even so it was still tainted in a way that was representative of each school. The only education I got was what our teacher chose to teach us. So yeah.
I add on to that. Lowering the voting age to 16 has something that has been brought up many times in a youth panel, and not just by the members, by people who have actually come to them and said it. But as Emer said, there's not that much education, so as young people do want to say in these things, they also aren't really educated enough, but they do want to say because they want to have a say in stuff that is impacting them and their future, but they also don't know that much about politics. It's not really touched on, mainly in history and especially at GCSE, which is optional. So I think that would really needs to be implemented into LLW.
The Youth Assembly actually would really be interested in taking forward that approach of lowering the voting age to 16. As you know, one of our main roles is impacting on legislature, and as we're the first sitting Youth Assembly to have a sitting executive, if that was to come into play, we would be really interested in taking that forward. Coming to the point of political education, it's well known that very, very few schools in Northern Ireland offer politics and government at GCSE, and very few again offer it at A level, which in my opinion is just completely wrong. So many more schools, but I do understand that is straight down to funding and educated teaching staff to take those subjects. But that is, that's another issue that we really need to top on.
Sorry, can I just jump in really, really quickly? Sorry, I know I keep going on. But just on our LLW report, the political education is there, it's in the curriculum, but it's just not being taught because LLW is relegated to the side because there aren't trained teachers, there's not time in school for LLW. Whenever you've got 10 GCSEs, schools are like, yeah, we'll stick it in the 30-minute period. Then we have instances in our report of students being told, just take out your phones, just sit there. And this is citizenship, this is RSE, this is political education, this is financial education, and it's not being taught in schools. LLW is not being taught, and our Let Us Learn report has everything. We've all the recommendations in there. But yeah, I just wanted to add that in because it's political education is there. The curriculum is really good if you look at it, but it's just not being taught. So yeah, that's my.
Thank you. Great. And again, I think if there was ever, as you referenced, an example of why maybe lowering the voting age might be a good idea, I think we're listening to it in this room today. And in terms of next indications, Cheryl, had you indicated? I wasn't sure if you had tried to.
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
But I know I wasn't sure if you'd had indicated. Had you come in?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you had. That's fine.
I'll jump in front.
Yeah.
No, I just want to say thank you so much. That was absolutely incredible to hear you all speak. They were all pitch perfect delivery, and I wish I could do that. So if there's any pointers, that would just be great. But each and every one of you raised so many valid points and so many things that resonated with me. And I wish I could kind of go through them all, but Nick kind of gives us evil eyes from the back there. Bullying is something that is a huge issue, and obviously we touched on it previously there with social media, self-harm, suicide. There are so many things that we have to do to get this under control, and it terrifies me for our youth growing up in the school. And school's only one part of it. You're in school for 8 hours a day, but when you go outside, it's the weekend, it's the people that you're socialising with, you can't escape it. In terms of bullying, what do you think we can do better to protect our young people? And the second question is, the area I come from would be a working class area in Carrickfergus. I know a lot of people and a lot of young people do not have the confidence to apply, even to be on these youth panels and boards. what can we do to improve the confidence of those young people so they feel that they can actually apply and then they can have a voice as well?
Can I jump in on that first point there? I want to reference the fact that bullying is often so much talk about policy. How can we change bullying policy? But I think one of the huge things is the amount of stigma around, bullying at the minute is, I have to say, is rampant. And it's not, I'm going to hit you, I'm going to do this, or even send you nasty messages. There's this by the way bullying, which is, making rude remarks about other people's family members and doing things, and it just going completely under the radar. Teachers knowing about it, and they just simply don't care, or just simply think it's just boys being boys. And that as well ties into misogyny, huge issue, especially with the rise of social media, Andrew Tate, etc. And then you also have the violence against women and girls, which I know Sinn Féin has taken a huge approach on at the minute and is absolutely paramount that we get that sorted, because it all ties in, and bullying, I think, is where that really starts at. But I think what you guys could do in terms of bullying is just set out, tell schools we have expectations. Teachers can't just let these issues go by the wayside. Any remark, pull it up. Because boys think that, I'm sorry, no, boys, and being a bit, but it is primarily boys. Boys think that they can just say things and get away with them. They think they can just say things because, oh well, who cares? But they can't. They have to be pulled up on it, and I think that's what teachers should do, and I think that's what you guys really should stand out to schools and say, listen, we're not going to put up with this. Bullying is, if you're just going to let it go until it does become physical, or until it does become, a suicidal thought or a serious mental health issue, you can let it go on to that point. But teachers need to start pulling up those wee remarks, which is where the seed is planted and where it grows into bullying. And just referencing your second point there, which was about, sorry, can you just repeat?
Just from the area I come from, it would be a working class area, and we would struggle to get young people to apply for, boards or panels like this because of a lack of confidence.
I actually do. I understand. So I'm from Mid Ulster, a town called Maherfelt. We have an awful, we don't have a lot of opportunities. Mid Ulster is one of those areas where, I find in Belfast, like, you hear all these things are going on. Like, in Maherfelt, we have nothing really going on. Everything seems to happen in Belfast, and that's probably another issue. I applied to this opportunity simply because it was one of my teachers who told me about it, not because it was actively advertised to me. So I think that's another issue as well, is kids not really knowing of the opportunities available to them. Every single board member here will have a different story to how they joined their committee or their group. But I have to say, I think definitely in areas outside of, your major towns and cities, your Belfast, your Bangors, things like this go by the wayside, and really that's one of the things. And confidence as well, as you mentioned, mental health, confidence, feeling like you're going to just stick out, you're going to be, there's often a word reference to tout and things like that. If you're a teacher's pet if you join something like this. So that's another thing, like I can remember telling some of my classmates about this, and it was kind of like, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? Why are you giving up your weekend to go up to Belfast? Just, things like that, That's a part of the reason. That's a part of the issue.
Yeah, my add on that is, a lot of young people actually don't know that these groups and organisations are actually a thing. They're not advertised the best. A lot of people don't know about these different groups that are here today, and don't know where to go to, and adding on to that as well, a lot of young people aren't actually aware of their rights that they actually have, and that they can speak out about their opinions, and they don't actually know that is their rights. A lot of young people don't know that we actually have the UNCRC to begin with as well.
Thank you so much.
Indication from David, and then Robbie. I think I just brought in your colleague ahead of you.
and rudely she took the question a bit right in front of me. But so, yeah, I'll find something. Yeah, I'll just put a line through. I was actually, Ellen, I think you had mentioned the school council being unrepresented. I was going to say, how do you ensure that your organisations are in terms of that? So, but I do think it is something, nevertheless, to think about, I think, in terms of, because I would have been the type of person that would have applied to these kind of organisations, and you've all been fantastic, but it's how we make sure that actually some of those people who are less likely to engage with those processes, and some of the parent organisations, Nikki and so on, I'm sure are engaged in that work, but making sure that some of those voices are brought in and encouraged and given that little bit of a push to get involved is one thing. Happy to have you comment on it. I'll give another question just because obviously that one's been asked, but the Mia, you commented on the standard of careers education, and for yourself and for anyone else who wants to comment, what would you most like to see change around that? Where do you think it's lacking, and what would you like to see more of in terms of careers education?
I have to say, in my school, I cannot fault the careers education that I was given. We had a very good careers education, but I did take her through a review of the report, which all of you should. You know, it really does give, it's anonymous insights from over 1,800 children from hundreds of different backgrounds across Northern Ireland, and the main issue spoken of was careers education. Now, I have to say, careers education is simply sitting in front of a computer, doing a couple of quizzes on platforms that were made more for children of an age above. But, like, careers education really should be more face-to-face. It should be more, it should be designed more for who you are, because I think a lot of kids who are I want to find the right word, not academically gifted, but children who are smarter tend to be pushed into university. Yeah. And that's not, you know, a lot of kids don't like school, and they're then pushed into trades, and there's no real in between. You're either university or tech. You aren't told about, there is hundreds of other opportunities now. You know, we do not live in the same era that our parents lived in, or that most of you lived in.
The oldies. Say it. Careers education doesn't seem to have changed much, though.
So I think that's
you know, that's what I'm trying to say. You know, it's either you go to university or you go to tech. And even at my age, you know, that's what we're being told. If you get your C, you pass your maths, you pass your English, you pass your science, you can go to tech. If you do well, you'll go to university. But you have that middle ground now. You have your tech diplomas, you have your further education, Northern Regional College. All of them are often offering absolutely amazing opportunities that can actually have, if you don't enjoy school, you leave at 16, you go to tech, you do your BTech, and you go on and you can actually go to university after that if you so desire. But schools aren't educating children on this. You know, I actually have a very good careers teacher who is, but I know that that's not standardly in the curriculum. I know that she is telling us that from her own knowledge. You know, whenever we go through our books, that's not in our books. You know, so that's really the issue that I think needs to be brought to the forefront, is making sure that children know all the possibilities available to them.
I think that's something actually. I think when the minister was in earlier, he said he was talking to the economy minister, Conor Murphy, about how that sort of transition works, and so hopefully we do over this term see some changes that destigmatise some of the other options and put them on a par with university. Because I went to university, but I certainly wouldn't advise anyone to go to university unless they're sure that that's what they want and they need and what takes them into the right field, because there are other options that are equally as good.
We're looking at a joint education and economy committee meeting where we can, and certainly careers advice will be something that we can
really
raise.
Important. Sorry, just to add on that there. You know, there's an awful lot of stigma around, especially going into trades and things like that nowadays. You know, it seems like if you go into trade you're not smart enough. That's simply not the case. You know, I have boys. I was speaking to a boy the other day who said to me, you know, I think I'm just going to be, I think it was like a joiner, because I don't think I really want to do well my GCSEs, so I think that's all I'm going to do. And I was going, but is that all you want to do? He's like, well, you see, you have to get whatever grade to go to do engineering in university. That's what I'd like to do, but I really just can't be bothered to get the result, or I can't get the result, is what he said. So I've just kind of consigned myself to doing that. And I was going, but if you think that you could work hard, why wouldn't you? So it's like, it's just so hard. But that's what, that's what young people are up against, this stigma, that, look, if you don't do well, then you'll just go on to do that or that. And that's not right, because those trades are actually good jobs. They are jobs that we need. You can't seem to get a plumber these days. So, this is the case, So there should be no stigma around that's what you do if you just can't do anything else. And as well as that, children should be pushed. If they're not doing well in school now, push them on, because if they want to do something, they'll do it.
Thank you. I am going to just bring Robbie in. And maybe, Robbie, if you want to direct your question to Emer, who's keen to come in, if that is appropriate, to make sure we bring in as many voices as possible, if that's okay.
Yeah. Absolutely no problem. I've got another question too. That I can do that. That's okay. Oh, it's absolutely fantastic, guys. The only group that I haven't really had much dealings with is Inna Lewis, but I'm going to make a commitment that I kind of pick that up, because I have an interest. I'm going to come to you after I speak to Emer here. So. I'm going to be honest, you're incredibly powerful, and I'm not just saying that just to be nice to you. Your way of communicating with passion is excellent, and I think the young people in Northern Ireland are very fortunate to have each of you advocating for them, and it's a powerful moment in Northern Ireland. And I think this last 4 or 5 years, with the emergence of the groups and the platforming, has been exceptional. But you had given, Emer, you had quite a bit down here, actually. You were first up. There was something that you talked about, which was equity and of the purpose in the curriculum, and it's something I actually raised with the Minister earlier on, and it was to do with the GCSEs. And in the independent review of education, it has indicated that perhaps now is the time to talk about the value of the GCSE as a terminal exam, and perhaps that it may not be. So could you maybe speak to that? I think it was maybe picked up in your report, and maybe expand on that a wee piece. But is that okay?
Sorry, I don't really understand the question.
So you talked in your report about the purpose of the curriculum and where it goes to and what it leads to. So one of the reports in the independent review of education talks about the pressure that's put on young people, particularly in and around GCSE. Transfer, yes, but also GCSE. And people say many GCSEs do get, but I think the world is now saying, well, why? Mm-hmm. Why are we asking that question? In terms of your group, I think you'd...
Yeah, so in terms of, I know in my school my school's very, I don't want to look.
You're okay. We'll black it out, we'll blur it out in the video.
My school would be quite curriculum focused in terms of, I do go to a grammar school, and everybody in my school does start off with 10 GCSEs, and I think you have the option to maybe drop 1 or 2 if you're really struggling with it. But I think something that we've worked on, we've talked about a lot between the Youth Forum and the Students' Union, is just that we need support for mental health in young people. And a lot of schools, I think, coming up to exam time as well, is when you have your talks about, stress and mental health issues and coping mechanisms and things like that. And I think we just think that it's very sort of tokenistic that it always comes up right before exams, and we think that support needs to be consistent throughout the year for all students. Do you want to come in on that, Ella?
Yeah, just around mental health and the support, for students. Yeah, so me and Emer spent a really long time working on these, and I think the support for students isn't there in schools. But so the support for teachers isn't there either to deliver this. And because we don't want to come across as can't think of an appropriate word right now, but being rude to teachers and saying, oh, yous aren't doing this, yous aren't doing that. They don't have the support, they don't have the time to deliver a wellbeing education on top of everything else that they're expected to do. They're expected to be counsellors, teachers, like parents, everything all in one, and that's just not like a reasonable expectation. And their workload is, and I know the deadline's 31st of May, but for that to be resolved, but that should also be a serious issue.
Mm-hmm. That's why in our asks, one of our key asks was to develop a module within all teaching qualifications to provide a baseline. We don't want teachers to be counsellors. We just want teachers to have that underlying knowledge that they can help students. One thing when we were coming up with these asks, as we sat down, we really had a long discussion about this, how we don't want to put more pressure on our current teaching workforce. We very much recognise that this is a long-term solution. This is not going to happen right here and right now, which is why we've given a time frame by 2029. And then also we've talked about implementing an upskilling program for the current education providers, but we really just want to stress that we're not adding to the current workload of our workforce.
Can I just say one point on the back of that as well, when we're just talking about teacher training? As earlier referenced in the Minister's address, the underlying need for teachers to have a base level of special educational needs training, which I'm sure, Alex, you could definitely touch on, is a huge thing, and it was heavily referenced in our survey, this need for more specialist support from educational aids, but just that base level in mainstream schools that all teachers should have. Alex, if you want to touch on that.
I actually heard someone say that at Stranmillis they got 1 hour of teaching on special educational needs, and I think that's a very big issue that needs to be put into when you're training to become a teacher. I think it definitely needs touched on more than just an hour. As I said there, I think also needs to be some sort of training to try and notice students who may be struggling because they have unmet special educational needs, and I think that is a very big issue, especially in mainstream schools.
Thank you, guys. I have just one point for you, Anilua, if that's okay. I'll set the context for this. One of my daughters is mixed race, and I became aware of the challenges that she could face when she was reading the book. It was a Disney book, and I wasn't aware of this until I had my daughter. And she was reading through, and it was about page 16 before she got to the point where the princess was black. And then she came to me and she said, Daddy, Daddy, Daddy. But the book was, to me, when I looked at the book and looked at all the books that we've ever had, there was a real lack of inclusivity. And I think some of the points that you were raising earlier on strike a chord with me as someone who's proud of Northern Ireland, and that Northern Ireland should be much more proactive in especially for families who come here and want to live here. Do you think we could do something in and around that in terms of the offering? So this is inside of school and outside of school, in terms of just changing the dynamic and how we think about who we all are?
Yeah, so inclusivity is definitely a big issue, because a lot of times when policies are enacted, when laws come into play, a lot of times marginalized communities do not get a voice in those issues, and usually they come underrepresented. So we should try to change that, because everybody's issues matter. As long as you live in Northern Ireland, your issue matters, and there is that loophole that, okay, when you come into Northern Ireland, you're not 16, you're not 18. You are not able to access education for some reason. And that is because the council doesn't deem it an obligation to educate children beyond the age of 16. And that shouldn't be the case. And especially for people who come into the country and they do not understand English, or they don't understand how, the complexities of Northern Ireland's education system, there should be a system in place to integrate those young students coming in and make sure they get a place. No matter where you came or your immigration status, you should have a place in the school. And the instances of schools denying newcomers admissions is simply unacceptable, even though they have places, because I know that I experienced that when I first came, that I applied to over 100 schools in Northern Ireland and not a single one offered me a place. And I find that very, very alarming, because I'm not the only one who experiences such. There are a lot of other asylum seekers, immigrants, refugees whose voices go unheard. Their voices go unheard, and they're not listened to. There are situations that are deemed, it's not happening to everyone, so there's no reason why we should highlight those issues, but they need to be heard. So definitely would be creating integration, specific targeted pathways for integration for older teenagers who are arriving into Northern Ireland, to make sure that they can access education if they need to. Vocational training too should be an option for them, and also ESO training, because some do not have that basic understanding of English, and there's a lot of instances where people wait over a year to access ESO classes, and the waiting lists are too long, and those people are just not doing anything within that time. Our organization tries to fill in that gap and provide them with education and, you know, give them that support system, but it needs to be more systemic. There needs to be a wider reach of those people because, you know, we cannot simply meet everyone, but there needs to be, you know, change at that systemic, you know, space. So thank you very much.
I think we've had a pretty clear commitment from the committee today that we would really like to engage with your group, as I know you've identified this as your first opportunity, but across the board for all the groups represented here today, it has been so good to hear from you and just so impressive and articulate you all are, and we could probably all learn a lot from you.
Can I just say, can I like to extend an invitation to all of you to our next plenary. It's a great hit, it's great fun. We're an in-house, obviously as you know, we're an in-house organisation, so pop down the hall at any time, and we really love giving feedback to not only you guys, but then we also have our two other, our rights and equality and health, so thanks for this. Thank you.
Very happy to. So thank you. I'm sorry, we took more of your time maybe than that had been planned, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to just quickly summarise actions and then we'll get through the last bits really?
Okay, so members, just to recap, the committee has agreed to bring the recommendations of diversity of NI to the attention of the department, and given that it also relates to further education, that would be for the attention of the Department of the Economy as well. And it may be something that we can touch on in the concurrent meeting with the Department of the Economy in due course. We have had Hansard for all of our sessions today, which means you've got a transcript of all three of those super sessions, and we can bring the Hansard of those to the attention of DE, and where issues cross-reference to each of the statutory committees so that they can pass it on to their departments. The committee has received a written update on the Addressing Bullying in Schools Act and might want to schedule an oral briefing, particularly in respect of measures that might be taken to gain greater reassurance about bullying in schools, because the legislation doesn't actually require schools to share their records with the department at the moment. And in respect of elections, I think you're going to all have to work on that on a party basis. Elections aren't devolved. But that's not to say that the young people can't influence the UK position. I think those young people can do anything. So.
Absolutely. That's great. So are we all agreed on those actions?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Right. That moves us on to item 8 on the agenda, and we'll move through the rest of this very quickly. So that is the period products, Department of Education Specified Public Service Bodies Regulations NI 2024. There's a briefing from the committee clerk at page 132, and the draft statutory rule from the department regarding the period products, Department of Education Specified Public Service Bodies Regulations NI 2024 at page 134, and it also refers you to the report of the Examiner Statutory Rules at page 142. So the committee considered the SL1 for this statutory rule at its last meeting, and it was agreed that we were content for the department to proceed with the rule. So the only action for me to take is to put the question that the Committee for Education has considered the period products, Department of Education Specified Public Service Bodies Regulations NI 2024 and recommends that it be affirmed by the Assembly. Is this agreed?
Right.
Thank you. So I am very conscious of time. At item 9 we had quite a lot of correspondence that came through. The most up-to-date list of correspondence is at page 3 of tabled papers. I'm going to propose that I circulate via the clerk some of the proposed actions that I had listed in terms of how we deal with that correspondence to be shared with members and agreed if that's appropriate for everyone. Are we agreed that's an appropriate way to dispose of that correspondence?
Agreed.
Okay. That's fine. And that takes us to item 10, Forward Work Programme. We have 2 weeks after the recess period where we largely have that filled, and then we are hoping, if everyone can get their availability, to the clerk for a short strategic planning session to look at some of the strategic priorities going forward. If we are happy that is how we can proceed with the Forward Work Programme at this stage, we can dispose of item 10. Are members agreed?
Yeah. The Review of Education panel don't seem to be available until May, but we're trying to get them to come over. And we may have the Human Rights Commission in there after recess. and the integrated education.
Yes, I was going to just add, there was one item of correspondence which does factor in directly to the forward work planning, which was from the IEF, the Integrated Education Fund, who had specifically asked to brief the committee. So if members are agreed, we can factor that into the forward work plan.
Yep.
Members agreed? So that takes us to item 11 of any other business. I'm going to take a bet that there is. Danny, you've got some AOB?
Yeah, no, it was just on the back of what we heard there. It was just, I can't remember what presentation we had. It was a question I asked around an inclusive strategy, and I think the answer back from the department was, haven't even looked at it. We're at ground zero basically. I actually think as a committee we should be following up on that there, because I don't think that's good enough.
Yeah. And if you want to propose that as an action, because I'm the committee agreed on that. Yeah, because that was something that was sort of highlighted early on as something that we're going to progress. So yeah, I'm very happy to follow that up. Any other items of any other business at all? No. So that takes us to date, time and place of next meeting, and that will be after recess, Wednesday the 10th of April, 2 p.m. in room 29. And thank you all for your contributions today with 3 really good evidence sessions, so thank you.
Committee Room 29, Sound.